Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Brazil-Canada Mining Insights, the sixth session of the second Brazil-Canada Virtual Mining Conference, which will bring a series of important discussions on regulatory framework, capital markets, ESG, diversity and inclusion, exploration, smart mining innovation, mining financing, among others. And it's taking place virtually until May 31st in preparation for the 16th Brazil-Canada Conference at PDAC 2022 that will happen in person in Toronto between June 13th and June 15th. I'm Carolina Albernas, CEO of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be our MC today. The platform you're in provides also the opportunity to connect with your peers, colleagues, and professionals from the mining sector from all over the world. Don't be shy, and before and after the event, go to the networking tab and check out who else is here online with us. There's also a matchmaking tool available for you, so meaningful connections can happen online. So let's make the best of it. Before we start, I would like to share a few reminders. The first two panels today will be in English, and the third panel discussion will be in Portuguese. We're offering simultaneous translations for the whole program, and you can access the Portuguese-English channel by switching the language in the interpreter icon on the bottom right side of your Zoom screen. Estamos oferecendo tradução simultânea. Os dois painéis iniciais serão em inglês e o terceiro painel será em português, mas você pode acessar o painel de português e inglês através do ícone de tradução simultânea na parte de baixo da sua tela do Zoom. You'll be able to ask questions to the panelists and as the discussions happen. Please use the Q&A box in the Zoom screen to send questions to our speakers. We do our best to answer the questions during the session. If any of the questions cannot be answered live, we will revert to you after the event. We have a packed agenda for you today with three very interesting panel discussions. The first one, moderated by Alisson Rajão, Director, Strategy and Business Analysis Manager at Vale, will address mining exploration in Brazil, trends and opportunities, and has among speakers Luis Mauricio Azevedo, President at ABPM, Mike Richard, Chief Geological Officer at Copper, and Scott Heffernan, Vice President Exploration at Equinox. The second panel of the day will be moderated by Adriano Trindade, partner at Matos Filho, and we will address pro-strategic minerals policy in Brazil and Canada, and has among panelists Frederico Machado, Secretary for Partnership in Energy, Oil, Gas, and Mining at the Brazilian Ministry of Economy, Antonio Neto, General Counsel at Aero Brasil, Bruno Scarpelli, Country Manager Brazil at Centaurus Metals, and Jeff Smith, Vice President Government Relations at Mining Association of Canada. And the third and final session of the day will be moderated by Paulo Soares, Corporate Communication Director at IBRAM, the Brazilian Mining Institute, and we will address how the sector can come together to change the face of mining and improve public perception and culture, featuring Silvio Lima, Director Institutional Relations at Apian Capital Brazil, Ana Cabral Gardner, Co-CEO and Co-Chairperson at Sigma Lithium Resources, and Luis Henrique Medeiros, Global Social Development and Planning Executive Manager at Vale. So without further ado, I would like to invite Alison, Scott, Mike, and Luis to join us here for the first panel discussion, Mining Exploration in Brazil, Trends and Opportunities. So gentlemen, thanks for being here, and I'll pass over to you.
So thank you, Mike, Scott, and Luis. It's a pleasure to have you here to present recent changes in the Brazilian mine legislation and the impacts that it can bring to the exploration environment in Brazil. And so I'd like to invite Luis to present his thoughts on these recent changes.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Mike and Scott, for joining me in this webinar. It's a pleasure. Not many times that Brazilians can join big giants like Vale, Copper, Equinox. I'm very delighted to be here, and I hope I can make this section some interesting for you guys. I'm gonna join my screen. Okay, thank you. Well, we're gonna speak a little bit about mining exploration in Brazil, and I think for some of you, I would like to introduce myself. I'm a geologist, a lawyer, 36 years in mining with a career quite normal. I start Western Mining, Barrick, Harsco, then I form FFA. And since then, which was in 2004, I basically was a director, founder, entrepreneur of about 12 venture capitals. They're all in Brazil, basically over projects from different commodities. The ones that are more remarkable, which some people consider the most important one, I disagree. I think all of them were important, but Avanco was ASX, Rio Verde a TSX, Harvest, we are operating a fertilizer mine, and we also have a venture capital called Jangada Mines, which is doing iron vanadium in Brazil. I'm since 2012, and we're going to talk a lot about this year, 2012, because what I tried to do here was a retrospective about the last 10 years. So since 2012, Brazil had faced some difficulties, and we decided to form a mine organization, which is a kind of group of Brazilians who join an association to defend mining. And this is called the BPM. That's what the company that I'm representing here. And I also recently was invited to be VP for the CNI in the division of mining. It's called Comin, which I think it's very interesting and would bring a lot of development to the Brazilian sector. Well, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the last 10 years. And I would like to show you some data that I collect together, which shows the listed company presence in Brazil since 2012, 2013, and today. So what you can see is that well, juniors arrived in Brazil basically in 2005 with the boom of the commodities. And at some point, we had about 100 companies in Brazil. But back 10 years ago, after GFC and after some, I would say, obstacles on the mining sector, Brazil have experimented reduction of the mine's presence in Brazil. And we're going to talk a little bit why and the side effects of this. But basically, in 2012, 2013, we have about 73 junior companies in Brazil. And in 2022, we have only 38. So it's a reduction, no doubt. Basically, the reduction was more sensitive to the ASX, which used to have 35 back 10 years ago, and today we have only 11 companies. In terms of the TSX, the reduction was less sensitive, about 30%. We used to have 38, and we have today 23. And the very interesting situation that we also facing is the fact that we basically have in 10 years ago, the concentration of those companies exploring for gold and for iron, probably because of the boom of the iron, and Brazil, because Brazil is famous to be one of the countries with the most impressive presence of high-grade iron ore. I thought, if you look at today, the iron lost that position to copper and nickel, and basically we have also different commodities that we used to not be explored as phosphate, as PGM, as lithium as well. So let's go for the next slide and try to identify why did happen. Well, basically, if you look at for the last 10 years, that's what happened in Brazil. Well, 2013, very challenging year because Brazil tried to pass a new mining code, which was not considered by the mining sector a very positive. What they were bringing was not something unusual for the mining sector worldwide, and also because brings a lot of, I would say, presence of the state, of the government, instead of presence and participation of private sector. Then just after that, in 2014, I would say the most famous Brazilian miner, Ike Batista, start to his process of melting, let's say that. After forming several companies with a lot of success, calling himself the new billionaire of the century, Ike start to see his companies basically failure and not deploying what he was promised to investors. So why that affected Brazil? The credibility of the mining sector was linked to Ike Batista at this point, because he started with the gold companies and he moved that to iron ore company, and that hurt the whole sector of Brazil. Especially banks and investors start to not have credibility on the sector. Just after that, without being really recovering from 2 bad years, Brazil also experimented the first significant disaster. The Mariana Tailings Dam had very serious consequences, not hurt too many lives, but in terms of the environment, show to the Brazilians the capacity of the mining to create damage to the environment. And that was not very positive as well. Well, just after that, Brazil had the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, which for sure was one of the creator of the new mining code back in 2013. But not because of that she was famous in terms of the mining sector, but basically because the way that impeachment came, it was exposing some corruption also in this government. And that hurt a lot the credibility of the private sectors over mining, over oil, over a lot of economic sectors. Well, in 2017, with President Temer, we start to see some good news coming from the mining sector of Brazil. And I think one of the most important things was the trying of the President Temer to pass 3 provisory remedies, reforming the mining code, reforming the tax over mining, and also bringing one inspiration of the mining sector, which was give to the regulator a more transparency and I would say protection as well through an agency. So 2017, I would say, was the year that things start to turn in terms of Brazil for the mining sector. In 2018, we have the reform of the regulation code, since the mining code was not approved by the Congress in the previous year. And we also had the starting of operations of the ANM, which is our agency. Well, just after that, in 2019, we had the accident of Brumadinho, which again bring to attention to the mainly to the society of Brazil and the people of Brazil about the consequences of mining can have over not just the environment at this point, but also to life of the stakeholders around the mine. Well, in 2020, the election of President Bolsonaro, bringing the, I would say, the flag of the entrepreneurs, that the liberal capitalism, also light a little bit the mining sector in terms of survive. But just not after a year of that, we have the COVID, which was very bad year for all the Brazilians, for all the world. But in 2022, we saw how the Brazilians can turn around. And we saw that today, 80% of our population is vaccinated and life is coming back to normal. So in terms of specific remarks regarding the mining in Brazil, I would say over the last 10 years, we have significant points to, I would say, to destack here. First is that more than 5 times we saw the Congress discussing the change of the mining code, but the mining code of 1967 is still in place and offering us a stable legislation, which is a security for investment, because the mining code of Brazil somehow inspires other mining codes, especially Australia and few other companies that you saw in our mining code of 67, a good example of how to deal with mining properties. Well, also another point that we should emphasize is that and we briefly spoke before, is about the mining code regulation. The mining code regulation brought to the mining sector, I would say some points that was claimed by the sector to be revisited and to be implemented as the possibility of exploration after final reports, the concept of resource and reserves aligned to the international concept, especially CRISCO 4311 and JORC, and also the possibility of using the mining concession as a property to guarantee for funding. We also, knowing the problems of the tailings and the accidents that we had, we start to investigate how can we manage tailings better, but also use the materials. And there was a regulation for that as well, brought in place recently. We also start to, Brazil was famous in the backs of the 80s and 90s for running for mining properties. Basically, the properties were put free with the official gazette, and people actually that step into the mines department at the time, called the NPM, was the one that was receiving those areas. And we changed that for electronic auction, which we're gonna speak in more detail in a little bit, but was something very suspicious for the mining sector, which has been proven extremely useful, and it's working very well. We also had the changes over financial compensation for exploration and mineral production. That has been modified, and I would say in terms of average in the world, to a reasonable aliquots and also under a very easy calculation basis. So the modernization of the Brazilian mining sector, let's say, was packaged and demonstrated very well with the creation of the National Mining Agency, ANM, which happened in 2018. So the change that we have recently, probably we're going to show here how they brought the mining sector to a situation where we are, that if you look at the numbers, does not look spectacular in terms of presence of the company, but is working extremely well because our production of our mining productions is increasing. Well, just to talk a little bit about this process of electronic auction, for the ones that you don't know, ANM already offer about 13,000 areas so far in 5 rounds, and they collect about 400 million reais, which is around $50 million, over 16,000 areas offered. And we estimated that there's still more, between 60,000 and 90,000 to be offered. Well, improvements on the institutional front of the mining sector. Why I'm including that here? I think to the sector to be robust and to be, let's say, significant to the Brazil, no doubt but that we need this institutional front. And one of the things that we realized back in 2012 is that we need a new voice. There was an organization of mines in Brazil called IBRAM, very well handled, but we consider that the focus of that the organization was more for big companies, for production companies, and we believe that the Brazil could achieve better and more if we have a voice for the explorers. And that was the feeling that we have when we formed ABPM in 2012. To bring, especially international policies, international trends to the Brazilian mining sector. And that happened in 2012. Another thing very important, I think, was that we already spoke, was about the new regulation of the mining code and the election of the first mandate of 5 directors to ANM, which 4 of them were completely new to the sector. And that mix was very well received by the companies and worked very well for about 2 years. Another thing very important that happened in the institutional front was the creation of the COMIN in CNI. For the who are attending don't know, CNI is the largest organization of the industry of Brazil and has become a link between the mining companies and the industrial sector. which is, we saw very productive and very efficient, and we're going to explain why. One of the things that we face here during the COVID was the absence of capacity of fight against for mining to continue to operate under COVID times. Why? Basically, all the service companies were stopping, all the industry were stopping. Agriculture is still moving on, but they don't use too many people. But mining was under pressure and eventually could have stopped. And the commune on the CNI was very important to defend that the mine could still operating. And they convinced the Minister of Mines, which convinced the President to include mining as essential, like mirror what happened in Canada and Australia, which mine never stopped during COVID times. Another thing very important was the entrance of the mining sector at the PPE. PPE is a pack of privatization linked to the Treasury Department, which is helping a lot the mining sector, especially on the projects that had some fatal flaws, have some difficulties in terms of regulation permits. Another very important improvement was the digitalization of the mining documents at A&M, which started 2021. And I would say the last thing, not less important, was the report of improvements over mining sector recognized by OCDE, which Brazil is trying to join since 2 years ago. Well, in terms of the regulations of the A&M, we have about 4 years of large work of by A&M, putting regulations together. Already we achieve about 100 regulations, but the most, I would say, important ones are the ones done in 2022 about safety over tailings, the adoption of resource and reserves in international compliance. In 2021, the use of minerals as a collateral, and the use of waste and tailings materials. Also in 2020, during COVID, we recognized that the A&M had difficulties in terms of capacity of process their job, and we convinced them to suspend the deadlines over the mining assets in terms of regulation, reports, and the compliance. That was done 3 months after COVID started in Brazil. And we also experimented some flexibility over trial mine regulations, which we found very useful in Brazil, since the permitting process of Brazil is considered a very slow process. And that helps a lot to put mining into production and basically start small operations before you exceed and improve and obtain the permits. So Brazil, during the last 10 years, as I pointed before, had improved the performance of their mining sector, and somehow they modernized themselves again through the National Mining Agency and the review of the regulatory framework. What happens with our competitors and neighbors? Chile, since 2019, the constitution reform is in the lives of the Chileans, and this is creating a high uncertainty about the future of mining in that country, which was famous to be the mining country of South America. Peru, also a very important player in the mining sector, which attract about 300 companies in the past, around 2012. The new administration announced an increase of mining tax. It's considered that the stakeholders is creating a lot of problems to the development of the projects. 2 projects already had been stopped caused by that. So new investments are very hesitant to go to Peru. Argentina, which in terms of size, is our biggest competitor. It's considered a very silly situation in terms of currency restrictions, and the introduction of an export tax is also frightening a lot of investors to that country. Well, my conclusion is that even with the reduction of presence of listed companies in Brazil, which happened in about 50%, I didn't find that so bad. Why? I'll explain. In 2022 compared to 2013, we look at that Brazil is not just producing or looking to produce iron, gold, aluminum, but also looking for phosphate, potash, PGM, and lithium. So we are reaching diversity, and I believe that will happen very soon. Also in 2022, we have more companies now exploring copper and nickel, about 11, than what we have in the past for iron ore, which Brazil is famous and has a large capacity. So we are somehow changing the focus of the mining sector in Brazil. Another thing very important to notice is that most of the companies in 10 years ago were very speculative. Basically, about 70% of the ASX listed company were considered micro caps. They have a market cap lower than 35 million Australian dollars with less than $10 million each in the bank. Another point very interesting that I noted is from the 23 companies listed in TSX today, 13, which means 55%, are with a market cap higher than 500 million Canadian dollars, and 10 of them are bigger than $1 billion. So Brazil is experimenting the presence of mid-sized companies compared to the previous 10 years, which were small micro caps. The company already, the junior sector is very well known to be recooking assets. Some assets are, let's say, explored and found, but it's very traditional that assets that majors don't look for are the ones that the junior look at with a different view. And that happened in Brazil, but not in the way that they recooked it. And a good example is Equinox and Erocopper. They picked up assets that in Brazil never pay attention, that were not remarkable, and turned this into billion-dollar companies. And you can, I would say the best example of that is Erocopper for me. They, since I graduated, I used to hear that Caraíba is ending. Well, I'm 35 years and Caraíba has a very large future, and I think very successful. I think that was a very big challenge that Erocopper took. Not many people had the appetite and I would say courage, and it was very well compensated. The same thing with Equinox. And those companies today becomes thousands of jobs for Brazilians and millions of taxes to the Brazilians. And they were created basically 5 years ago. Another thing very important that sometimes Brazilians think that to be sold is a bad thing. I don't think be sold is a bad thing. I'm the former of Avanco, and we sold this in 2018. And this brought to Brazil 3 groups, Appian, Greenstone, and Oz Minerals. These 3 groups, instead of 1 mine, have 5 mines, and they create, again, thousands of jobs, billions to investments to Brazil. So, in my opinion, if I compare 2013 to 2022, no doubt the sector is more robust today. Well, let's talk about opportunities. And I'm pretty sure the geologists are going to speak more about this. And I'm pretty sure Mike and Scott can put a lot of color. But what I would like to emphasize is that people always think that about Brazil and what was not as successful in Brazil. I look at it the other way. I think Brazil has a lot of merits and it needs to be looked at in very detailed. And sometimes people forget about the importance of, for instance, of people. We have 200 million people here. This is a market. And these people is very well trained and can be used as a mining force. We have about 2,300 colleges and universities. So training is increasing in Brazil. And the graduation is something that you can see is very normal in these days. So we have people and we also have place. We have the 50th largest country in terms of territory, very highly prospective, at least 6 very good environments. I would list Vale do Curaçá, Aero Quadrangular, Pilar Guarinos, Carajás, and also the North Belt. Totally unexplored for minerals, Brazil is considered to have less drill than any other country in South America. With a lot of good access and good infrastructure, if you compare 2012 to now, we have 3 very big ports and a lot of rail being built in the last 10 years. We are probably the only country in terms of mining presence with clean energy. And this is very well appreciated by the industry today. And we have, it's complex, but we have a very stable legal fiscal jurisdiction, no doubt about that. So we are missing improves of the permit process. We are missing, stop talking about changes over mining policies. We need to reinforce policies to attract especially local investors. And no doubt that the bureaucracy and lack of local capital is still forcing and hanging us to not be well developed and explored. But this is changing, and you can see this. And I hope I have presented that to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation. Very interesting from a lot of aspects and with a very broad view for the Brazilian exploration environment. So Luis, question, maybe a question for you and for the other panelists. Do you see, we saw, as you presented, a change in the profile of the companies exploring in Brazil, especially the junior ones. Would you say that this is a trend, or if we see they are now bigger than it was in the past, can we say this is a trend for the future?
I think it's a mix, Alison. I think it's a mix. One thing, and the information is passed very fast today. So no doubt that we are not able to attract, I would say, companies with less cash. Why? Because Brazil is a bureaucratic place. They'll come here, they wait. They cannot wait 1 year for a permit. They cannot wait 2 years to develop a mine. And they can do that in Australia or in Canada much faster. So these, I would say, small, micro caps are not coming here anymore. I thought the companies that survive here in this, I would say, desert weather that we bring to them become stronger. And I'm one of them. I create Avanco with an initial capital of $200,000, no doubt about that. But that's very hard, and sometimes is more lucky than, I would say, planning. But no doubt that Brazil is considered a cheap place to acquire property. We saw today a merge of Aura with Big River. That's a good example. And I think you can see that companies like Appian and even Eurocopper, which bought assets, complex assets, have been extremely successful. So there is fertility in Brazil. That's the big message that we have to pass.
Maybe I can add to that there. Luis, yeah, I think you're absolutely right in the message. I'm not sure the number of companies is really, we should look too much at that. I think we're, less companies. I think we're seeing a lag indicator. I think the top of the commodity boom cycle we saw throughout the rest of the world, basically commodities with the credit crisis dropping out in 2008. So it was a buildup from, let's say, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. And a lot of these smaller companies are formed at the top of these cycles when capital is available. And I think we saw, the credit crisis, but then prices come back in 11, if I recall. And it takes a while for that cash to run out, right? So I think Brazil was lagging a little bit. So I think what we're seeing in those days was just a lag indicator on the top of the boom commodity cycle in terms of number of companies. If we translate that 10 years later, if people recall 2016 for copper prices, 2015, 16, they were low times, right? Very difficult times, not much capital available for anything. So we're seeing that build up again. And I think, assuming that things keep going as they are in Brazil in terms of reform, et cetera, we're going to see those small companies come back. I don't see any reason why. I mean, you're right in that it's complex, but it's complex everywhere right now. So I just think maybe it didn't come, the numbers didn't come back as fast because of COVID. But I think we would, if it wasn't for COVID, we'd see many more, given the reforms, we'd see many more companies there than the numbers indicate now, I think.
Yeah, I'll chime in. All very good points. And I think indeed, the downward trajectory in terms of the number of companies is definitely a retrospective look at the trend itself. One of the things that stood out to me when you showed the stats was the number of companies, and then fewer companies but bigger market caps. One of the big factors in that list you presented is the consolidation of the space and the M&A activity. I think at quick glance I saw at least 10 of those companies were actually acquired and picked up through various M&A deals, which has a tremendous impact on that. And I think it's during these low commodity prices that Mike just mentioned on size will help you weather the storm. And spinning this around into more of a forward-looking statement, I agree with Mike. The trend's likely to turn, and we'll start to see a return of the smaller companies. But it is still a formidable investment and formidable commitment for the microcaps to move into Brazil, starting fresh. But the reforms and commodity cycle that we're in now are all going to be very positive or bullish factors for the businesses, microcaps going forward.
Well, and can you mention one or two favorable factors that bring or that make Brazil attractive today for investment in exploration, and maybe the factor that it comes or operates in the other way that makes it harder to attract exploration, which is a very risky activity for Brazil?
I'll go first if I might, but I think in a word, prospectivity. And Luis touched on it in his presentation. Brazil is a very large, natural resource rich country that, given various factors, has seen little of the early stage junior exploration activity, which are usually the pioneers out there making discoveries. And so there's a real lag there. And you have these very rich belts that are underexplored in recent times, especially with modern exploration techniques. So I think prospectivity is one of the key rationale in our commitment to Brazil, for sure.
I think prospectivity, Scott, you're absolutely right. When you're looking at places to invest, the number one reason you go invest somewhere is for prospectivity or endowment. And I often get asked, how do you see Brazil in terms of its endowment compared to other countries. And I kind of see Brazil at a stage now that's like Peru 25 years ago in terms of its maturity of exploration. So that for sure is the number one. And then quickly following that, I would say, stability, legal stability and political stability in terms of, we're in a capital intensive business. So we have to be able to see out, 5, 10 years, 15 years and longer. It's very difficult to get that capital if it's an unstable market. So I would say Brazil is seeing, more stability recently. And I think that's a huge factor. And as Alison said, that could go both ways, right? So it's been very favorable, let's say, since 2018, 2017, 2018. We feel a change. And I think that's, endowment and stability in terms of investment are the two key factors for us here.
Yes, just to complement, it's apparently strange, but at the same time, we see a country which impeached its president. At the same time, we saw improvements in the legislation, and the legislation itself kept stable, as you mentioned, which is maybe different from other countries, especially when it comes to mine. So going forward, do you think, based on your experience in other countries, especially in Latin America, would you say that our framework for mining, our legislation, or the mining legislation in Brazil is competitive against our peers around the globe?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I think absolutely it's competitive. I think there's a whole bunch of factors to look at in terms of the legislation in general. But if we take exploration, we're talking about exploration more here. I absolutely think it's competitive. Brazil has a system where you need to work the properties and show that you've worked the properties to keep them in good standing. Many countries are not like that. Many countries, you just pay the fee and you get it. So basically that blocks basically the business. People can hold on to properties forever as long as they have money to pay for them. But on the other hand, if you want a system that's open like that, which Brazil has, you really need to turn around the processing, the administrative processing of the reports, the acquisition, et cetera, like that. And I think that was slow before, and it has been getting better. So I think if a focus is to make that process more efficient, which it has been, which we've all felt, I think definitely it'll become more competitive as the administrative process becomes more efficient.
Well, and based on your recent experience in Brazil, or coming to Brazil, or acquiring asset in Brazil, would you be able to mention what, when you say to your board of directors, now we are in Brazil, a country famous for a complex legislation, what go wrong and what went better than your expectations and when you arrived here?
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. When we started Equinox, Brazil was the factor, the main consideration. We always joked that Brazil is not for beginners. Because of its litigious nature and the bureaucracy that's been highlighted, but there has been a lot of very positive steps forward. We've succeeded, which is it wasn't easy, but I'd say our expectations in terms of the challenge were met. We knew it wasn't going to be easy, but we delivered, Brazil delivered, and here we are. Going forward, I think the big challenge is with respect to the permitting clock, as I refer to it. And we've seen great strides with A&M in the mining regulation and requirements side of the equation. It's the peripheral elements now that I think are the roadblock, if they're, to use the right word. Particularly the state environmental agencies being overwhelmed, under resourced to keep up with that clock. So while we're creating this path that streamlining business and keeping it moving, which is a key, as Mike pointed out, it's those peripheral elements that are the challenge now. And so, if there's a focus pivot, that's where Brasilia should be looking.
Yeah, I think I can second that too. I mean, before making our investments in Brazil, there was a lot of kind of negative talk about Brazil, and not having worked there, systematically or over long periods of time before the Eurocopper investment into Minas Alcaraíva. But then looking, we invested in an established company known by Brazilians with highly qualified people, and I think in this specific case, it really helped us. So Air was really a Brazilian company working in Brazil. We have a few people here in Canada, 10 or 20, but the rest of the thousands of people working are in Brazil. And I think doing it in that matter where they were showing us basically how to operate in Brazil was a huge advantage for us. So although you heard all these negative connotations or comments, I think Brazilians really know how to operate in Brazil best. And we've kind of taken that on since day one in terms of pushing down decisions and getting the recommendations from the ground up, and I think in terms of, in the future, I think you said it, Scott, right, is just keep on this reform of the policies and making things a bit easier to operate. And Brazil has a real bright future, I think.
Thank you, Mike. And well, and continuing in terms of the improvements need, would you say that your company, maybe this is one good question for Ruiz, who acts really as an entrepreneur. Would you say that the recent reforms affected your investment decisions recently? What type of or what kind of burden it added to your company, if there is one, or on the other hand, if it makes it easier to operate?
Well, I think the main significant reform that we have made was create A&M, because before we know that Brazil is bureaucratic, but the fact that the DNPM used to be linked to the Minister of Mines, which was linked to the President of Brazil, push us to the situation which is sometimes the politics had too much influence over the mining sector. For instance, some companies which, like Mike or Scott said, didn't work. They were not really losing their properties, and they were basically jamming the system. Now, I think based on the fact there is 5 directors over there, they are elected by 5 to 3 years, and by the fact that they need to be, let's say, formalized by the senator, gives us some kind of independence and give us a lot of more transparency and security, no doubt about that. That's a big thing, because this is for companies, like they both said, mining companies, they can miss a hole. They can do, let's say, a bad drill hole, but they cannot miss a property. As soon as you get the property, you should be allowed to take the ore from the ground. Like that is something that the investors do not accept at all. Losing the property or having the property not granted or permitted without no reason.
Okay. And Luis, would you say that because in Brazil we have as well a lot of artisanal miners and maybe some invasions, the people who are looking for to occupy the land, would you say it is manageable to deal with these people when, as you said, you have a mining property, and if you have other disturbing factors not exactly related with the mine, but with illegal occupations or even with occupied by artisanal miners, would you say that in Brazil is if we face a situation like this, is it manageable? Do you have the proper support from the authorities?
It's a very complex question, and it had a lot of, I would say, side to answer. But in my opinion, if you have a company that have a very good relationship with the stakeholders, which means the locals, that you are supported by your community, that if you are working in ethically and transparently, you're going to get the support from the ANM, from the government of Brazil, from the police, and also for the stakeholders. And probably if you are that company, you know how to find a way to probably negotiate also some terms. But we can't ignore, Alison, Brazil had the experience of a very social distance between rich and poor. We have a lack of middle class here. And those people specifically that are doing the garimpos, most of them are people that has no other options. I thought what we cannot ignore and what we cannot tolerate is the fact that some bad entrepreneurs, some bad Brazilians, which are not the ones that are poor, that are there without any, let's say, way out, are doing those mining, as we have seen recently in the papers, because that is an organization crime, which do tax evasion, which do slave relationship for labor, and are avoiding totally tax in Brazil. That cannot be tolerated, and it's a police case.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments from the other panelists about the current environment for exploration in Brazil and our gain of competitiveness against our peers in South America, or any other addition?
Maybe I'll make a high-level overview or closing remark, in that the industry itself, it's getting harder to explore everywhere. It's getting harder to advance projects from exploration through to development, construction, into production. That's the same the world over. I think that with the steps we've seen Brazil take over the last 2-3 years, and I want to make one other comment too with Luis's history, and to your comments, Alison, about stability. You look at what Brazil's been through with the political changes and so forth, the global changes that we've all faced, and yet they've still made very progressive, positive steps forward, despite those added challenges, which I think really speaks to Brazil and in the long-term future success. If this trend, this pattern keeps going, then absolutely Brazil is going to become a more and more attractive place to explore. And it's still not for beginners, and it's really hard to start something from scratch. Junior microcaps, early stage companies and so forth. But I think that will come in time.
Yeah, really nothing to add to that. I think that's basically summarizes what we've been saying, right? And we didn't plan to say it this, but this is what's going on in Brazil, right? It's very positive.
Well, one thing that I would add is like it's very good to hear people like Mike saying that they took a company full of Brazilians and they delivering because that is our message most of the times. Brazilians are hard workers, no doubt about that, and the way that we receive, I would say, the new venture capitals come to Brazil, respecting our culture, admiring the performance of the Brazilian works. That's how you build really big companies. I'm very glad that companies like your Mike, your Scott are doing so well. You deserve that because you are changing the attitude, which is hard. And what we have to do in Brazil is disseminate that message. Like I'm very glad when I see your market cap growing every day because I see Brazil is getting taxes, Brazil is getting jobs, yeah. And no doubt that this is doing in a way of mutual cooperations between our countries. And one day we're going to have the venture capital here in Brazil, which we're going to change also the society of Brazil, which invests in mining as well, not only in industrial companies, in oil companies, in paper companies. We're going to have that here. And I'm pretty sure your culture are going to be part of this here as well. Like, why not? I'm pretty sure Eurocopper and the Equinox would like to have Brazilians as investors as well.
Sure, yeah,
absolutely,
no doubt. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. And well, I think I have a question for Mike and Scott as well, because when you acquire a company in Brazil, have you sensed a kind of any disruption in terms of cultural change that you had to bring from abroad to a Brazilian operator? I mean, broadly speaking, in terms of health and safety, or in terms of the administrative rules, or in terms of production, have you sensed any kind of disruption from the day you announced an acquisition from and in the following months? Would you say that a kind of the employees or the community surrounding your operations had taken a step back and say, "Oh, let us slow down and see what's happened"? And does it make you feel like a disruption when you came and stepped in?
I could start. Sure. That. I don't think disruption is not the word that comes to mind. I mean, it's a learning curve on both sides. I would say the biggest change, not from health and safety point of view, because Brazil is advanced there. I would say the biggest thing for us would be the public company and capital markets requirements. So the way data is acquired, all the transparency involved with bookkeeping, accounting, your data, everything. In our case, that had to be kind of brought to Brazil, right? So everything on the technical side and health and safety and all that, there wasn't any really big changes. I mean, we're all growing together, but no big changes there. But from a capital markets and what's involved with the rules and regulations of being a public company, that was a big step for people to take. So you had to kind of think of things differently and think of things a lot in the value sense of the word, right? Not just doing your work because this is the work you had to do, but what's the most important thing I need to do today from a value perspective? So I would say, disruption's not, but I would just say kind of a new way, a new perception of how to see your daily work across the board for everybody involved in Brazil, I think.
Interesting.
As for Equinox's history, like we too are 100% Brazilian in country. And I would say that the disruption that we were the disruption. We got inserted, the 5 of us, as the management team for a company, a failed mining startup in Brazil, and I'd say the disruption was the new management team and having to sit and meet and convince and convey, build the relationships and the trust. That trust was the big part. The expertise was all there. The systems, sure, they were always working to improve and better those systems and set better standards and so forth. Our mantra at Aurizona, the GM there, they want to make that the best gold mine in Brazil. That's their goal. So the disruption was us. And who are you guys? And once everybody kind of got comfortable and familiar, and we started to get through the first couple of challenges and build some momentum, the energy, the excitement, the culture really started to evolve positively and rapidly. And I think that our success is directly attributed to that.
And
you mind if I make a question, Alison? And I think it's a very good opportunity. And I would probably that could be a question to you as well. Sometimes the government of Brazil come to us and ask one thing. I said, what should we do to attract companies in terms of technical information, in terms of attraction of our potential? Well, you both geologists, and you also in a large company. I'm pretty sure the framework legal is very well, but specifically you both came to Brazil to look for properties that have been explored by large companies. Like Eurocopper was explored by Caraíba as well, by Glencore, and also by Codelco. And they didn't saw the potential and the size that you have today. Equinox, in other way, Santa Luz property were looked at by Barrick. Equinox was Brascan and British Petroleum as well. They didn't saw that potential. So sometimes I question myself, like, do geology mapping, do geochemistry? I don't think that's a secret, because you're gonna redo it again, and you're gonna look at differently. But if I would go back to the Brazilian government, what I think it's very important is the residual information that is over there, that those companies probably had, that was never able to give it to you because it's in paper or is in a bad format. Would you agree with something like that? That's important, or just you would ignore and nothing to be done on that direction?
I'll go first. As far as our initial attraction and being drawn to Brazil was the Aurizona project, which was explored by Eldorado and Newmont in the early 90s. And one of the things is scale. We can operate at smaller scales than the senior producers, but it was more of a complete package. We didn't see any fatal flaws. It was more looking at the opportunities, and you need to look at what you're going to need on the engineering side, also the geology. And we quickly saw that what we had we could make better and we could make bigger, and that we were going to have to start pretty much from square one, because there isn't a repository of historical exploration information out there. One of the successes, we're putting up news here soon on our 2021 exploration in Bahia, and it's amazing that we have this opportunity that we can take brand new permits and make discoveries within months, just doing real basic geology that has probably been done 2 or 3 times over. So there's huge value in making that information available wherever possible.
Absolutely. I don't think I would recommend flying new surveys, at least if there's areas that have no data. I mean, I think there's a lot of data there that just needs to be brought to the attention of investors or to the public. In our case, there was no central database with, this was also a privately held company for a number of years, so there was no requirements. So basically, and we're still finding data today, right? So after 40 years of production and work, getting all that data into a platform where you can actually see it. Basically, that's the story of Ero Copper. There's years and years of data. So I think if that's an example that's probably could be replicated in a number of cases throughout Brazil, is what Luis said, is get the data, out, and you'll attract investors.
I'll add, I've seen, you look at BC, some of these other jurisdictions, but many others that have taken the effort and time to make all the historical works available from assessment reports and other sources. This has really given the prospector and the juniors the leg up in that foundation they need to see an opportunity, and then to raise the venture capital and make that commitment. So that bigger picture, if this was something that was to be made available, it would definitely accelerate the increase in the number of companies and junior exploration capital coming back to Brazil.
Oh, I have let's say some experience in data management within Vale. We came from a physical library with past, where we storage our past work in paper, and then we moved to an electronic library. Vale did this investment, and it took some years to transform all the information from the so-called exploration group in Vale into electronic data. And for, well, Vale is a company which invested in some systems for storing information about the drill holes, and I can tell you that in Canada the system is different. So we don't have maybe the same level of information in both countries, but we have a place to storage all the information. And we have and traditionally we used to store all the core of the drill holes as well in Carajás. So, but from now and then there is somebody working for some information which is hard to find. But we usually find the information. It may take some time, but it can be found, fortunately. But when we explored in other countries, like in Africa, in countries where we have an exploration office, especially in mid-2000s and early 2010s, we had to transfer the data, and sometimes data were in let's say in the notebooks from people, notebooks that were stored in the company when people left. So we had some more difficult. But I'll have a last question for Mike and Scott, since Luis is already a representative of small cap companies in Brazil. Would your companies come to Brazil if you'd have to explore from grassroots, or from or take a more early stage property in terms of development? Or what's behind the strategy of acquiring an operating company and do, let's say, I don't know if I'm correct to say brownfields instead of greenfields exploration. And would you come to Brazil to work on grassroots?
Mike, you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's would we come to Brazil? I think it's the opportunity, right? So I don't think we plan we're going to do this in Brazil. As you look at the opportunity that's there, and then you weigh the risks and you say, okay, this is worth doing it, right? We didn't plan it was all going to be. This opportunity came, we looked at it, and that was it. And the changes over the years and the success Ero Copper had in Brazil has made for us that we think we can grow a much bigger company in Brazil itself. We don't have to go to other countries to grow this country with the nature of how Brazil is developing from an exploration point of view. So this wasn't planned. It was the opportunity. So I don't know if that's the case with Equinox, but I think most people, unless you're a Brazilian or unless you've had experience in the country before, you don't really plan to start a company there. You say, I know these assets could maybe be of value, and let's try that there, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but for us, it was really the opportunity to pick up these assets in Brazil.
Yeah, it's I agree. No one really plans to start in Brazil. We were very close to finishing a deal in West Africa when the Aurizona project, the opportunity was presented to us, and we quickly pivoted away from West Africa to Brazil and the Aurizona project because of the merits of the project. Our focus at the time, our want, was to build a mid-tier gold producer. So core to that is the production and the production scenarios, fast track to being a producer and growing that production base so that you can then expand. And one of the key pieces for us was always to have that growth story. Any opportunity we saw had to have that organic growth component to it. So where I said earlier, we knew we could make it better. We also knew we could make it bigger. We continued to do that with Aurizona. It's going to be a mine that's in production for generations with what we know and understand and believe right now. Similarly with Bahia, we've got one producing asset, now two, recently was Santa Luz turning production. We've also got an unexplored greenstone belt that we know will create resources and create resource reserve growth and mine life extension there over time. So for us corporately, it always is the opportunity. We brand ourselves as the premier gold producer in the Americas. This is a tagline. If the next opportunity we saw was back in West Africa, we would probably make that decision to go. You need to be opportunistic. So I think your question is more about starting grassroots. So we are now at a size that we are entertaining more early stage exploration plays. But again, it's got to have that growth, that production component of the story. So there's lots of belts I'd love to go and explore. But without that cornerstone mine or resource there that could be fast tracked to production, it's going to be a tough sell.
And the stability.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The stability.
In other words, do you have some amount of money for early stage exploration in Brazil in one of your companies?
We don't really break it out that way. Our annual budgets have been in the $40 to $45 million range for 3 years now, and we foresee that going forward. Honestly, they would be bigger if we could find the resources, the drills, human resources, and open up more access to more areas. We've got several thousand square kilometers of productive greenstone belts to explore on the portfolio now. So to be looking for something new, pretty tough sell when I have conceptually $150 million worth of exploration already mapped out to do in Brazil on our existing current plans. But if you look at it, we break it out from reserve replacement, resource growth, and greenfields. And I'd say out of the 45 million this year, that probably it's probably a third split between reserve replacement, resource growth, and true greenfields. Keeping that exploration pipeline stocked with opportunities. Orizona and Bahia. I mean, these are two belts where we've got 2,500 square kilometers of ground to do so with. So very much so thinking early stage through, bolt-on production ounces.
Very, very similar for us, Scott. So a similar budget, around 45 million. And I would say we started with very little grassroots money. So mostly, getting the reserves higher quality, etc. Now that we see a plus 10 years of life of mine, doing the same thing at other assets, now we're increasing the amount of grassroots budgets somewhere in the order of 25%, depending on how a few of the programs go. But I would say it's a very similar story for us. You need once you stabilize the business, then you could start looking for higher risk opportunities.
If I can add on this, I think if you look the ratio of exploration to brownfield in the world today, 60% of the exploration is being done by majors. No doubt about that. Is real exploration? I'm not sure. I think the world changed a lot. When I was in '84, I used to do these blitz geochemics, which we call exploration really in Western mining. But this is, I would say, doesn't exist. And the private equities, small companies, Alison, cannot do that. Nobody going to give you money to go to Brazil and really test something. Has to be something. So what is the secret to new, for me, to new grow, to new ventures? Is to probably have the Brazilians having access to funding, and through like they done in Australia, which I traveled a lot to Australia and I know a little bit more. Like that's very normal. You're a geologist, you like that area, you've been working over there. There's a soil geochemist there. You put a bunch of friends together, each one that gives you $10,000. And you go there, sometimes you put a loan on your house and you get $300,000, do some geophysics and bing, drill. That needs to be found here. And then you can attract companies like theirs. That's the purpose. And in terms of the Brazil, what we can add, and I hope the Brazilian government is hearing what we're saying, stability is key. Because if you can find something and you cannot take it, well, then there is no encouragement. Why I'm going to put my friend's family, my family money to do that if that will not come to me? And it needs to come in the right time. Can take 10, 20 years, because my family probably is looking to that, the return of that investments to my friends are looking for that too. That's the new venture capital that exists. And the good thing is that with the stability that we are experiencing now, some countries is going in another directions. Like South Africa, for instance, is very normal. Like it's a very well-developed and explored country, but it's considered not safety. Many companies fail in Africa, and even in Asia, this is happening. Indonesia, this is happening. So Brazil needs to reinforce that message, but also find a way to create this venture capital over here, because we have the money. We cannot be buying BDRs of Tesla, of big companies overseas. We should put that money, which we're gonna brought here and generate more jobs for our kids, for our nephews. That's what we need to really change in Brazil. That's my opinion on that.
Okay, Luis, thank you. And thank a lot, Mike and Scott, for sharing your thoughts with us today. It was it's always very interesting to see how different people think. And thanks again, Luis, for putting together the current framework for exploration in Brazil from various perspectives. So thank you all.
Thank you, Allison, for moderating. Thank you, Louise, Scott, and Mike for joining us here today. It was very interesting to hear from you guys again. So really appreciated you being here. Thank you. So next, I'd like to invite, we have 2 more panels happening today, so don't go anywhere. Like, there's a lot of interesting conversations happening. We would like to invite our next panelist to join us for the discussion on pro-strategic minerals policy. So I'd like to invite Adriano Trindade, Frederico Machado, Bruno Scarpanelli, Antonio Neto, as well as Jeff Smith, to join us for our next discussion. I would also like to take this opportunity and wish a happy birthday to both of our panelists here today, Antonio and Bruno, who are celebrating their birthdays with us here today. So thanks for taking time off your agenda and for being part of this discussion. Really appreciate it. So Adriano, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. And thank you, BCCC, for inviting us to take part in this panel and to putting together a panel on strategic minerals. That's quite a subject. It's very relevant worldwide, including for Brazil and for Canada. The comment that I can make as an opening comment is that many countries are paying close attention to those minerals that are considered as critical or strategic, as we say here in Brazil. There was a report issued by the International Energy Agency last year, May last year, that was a very substantial report that called the attention to the fact that considering the increase in demand due to energy transition initiatives, some minerals may have an increase of 200% or 300% in demand. And some other minerals may even have an increase of 13-fold. So that's quite substantial. And that's the idea of this panel, to discuss how Brazil is considering strategic minerals, how Canada adjusted some of its policies for critical minerals, and also to give some examples of companies that are dealing with projects of strategic minerals in Brazil. So that's why I have these 4 panelists here with me. Frederico Machado is from the Office of the Minister of Economy for partnerships, for investment partnerships. Antonio Neto is a representative from Mineração Caraíba, who is a part of Aerocopper. Bruno Scarpelli is from Centauros, and Jeff Smith from Canadian Mining Association. So each of them will present a specific and interesting perspective with regard to strategic and critical minerals. So without further ado, I would invite Frederico to tell us a little bit of the strategic minerals policy of Brazil, which has been in place for just over a year. And after that, we can talk about some practical examples and pass on to Jeff Smith. But first, Frederico, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriano. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Antonio, Bruno, and Geoffrey for joining us in this panel today. I also thank BCCC for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to take part in the BCCC webinars. Well, critical minerals. As we know, critical minerals have become a key issue for many countries, and it's not different in Brazil. With the growth of global value chains, the national economies are increasingly interconnected and specialized in specific activities. As a result, national economies are more and more dependent on inputs produced in other countries, which means also that such countries are more exposed to events of supply disruption, which is quite critical from an economic perspective. At the same time, the transition to a low carbon and digitalized economy is likely to increase sharply the global demand for specific minerals. In this context, ensuring continuous and predictable supply of critical minerals must be a primary goal for any country in the world, including Brazil. In my short presentation, I will address our new strategic mineral policy, one of the main approaches to put Brazil in a safe or solid position in the global supply chain of critical minerals. Let me share my screen, and Adriano, tell me if you can see it, okay? So when we talk, before looking at the policy specifically, I think it's important to introduce you to PPI, the Brazilian Investment Partnership Program, and why PPI is involved in this policy. So PPI was created in 2016 with the purpose of increasing cooperation and synergy between the government and the industry. Our current portfolio, as you can see in this slide, is comprised of 177 projects, including highways, airports, railways, oil and gas projects, energy generation, transmission, several infrastructure and energy projects that require partnership between the government and the private sector. All those projects are recognized by the Brazilian government as the most relevant and strategic ones, and therefore they are granted by law top priority at all levels of government. In general terms, the program aims to build sustainable and well-designed concessions and PPPs in Brazil. We try to add efficiency, value, and governance to those projects. So we try to give a special attention to design projects with fair risk distribution, high level of legal certainty, full transparency, and predictability. At the beginning of the program, our primary job was supporting ministries and regulatory agencies to better design and structure such projects so they could go to auction and, of course, raise the interest of the industry. However, we realized afterwards that this approach wasn't enough to make the PPI projects get off the ground. Some projects, after they had been transferred to the private sector, faced complex challenges to get permits, especially those from environmental agencies. That was, of course, a big problem because the primary objective of the program is creating new jobs, is increasing public revenue, bring economic benefits to the population and the society as a whole. These outcomes only can be reached with the implementation and operation of such projects, and of course, on a sustainable basis. Therefore, since 2019, we have focused not only in our work, not only on building successful auctions, but also working on the projects after they are auctioned off. We started to deal with environmental issues and giving support to our private partners to get the governmental permits and authorizations required by law. We started to work as a true hub, dialoguing not only with investors, ministries, and regulatory agencies, but also with governmental agencies that deals with environmental licensing, with indigenous rights and land reform, and of course, directly with local and traditional communities. The idea is giving more sustainable projects, is making even more sustainable projects, and at the end of the day, speeding up approval and implementation of such PPI projects. So that was exactly the same context that the Pro-Strategic Mineral Policy was created by a decree 1 year ago. So we know that Brazil is a resource-rich country and have many strategic mining projects being developed. However, similar to the PPI projects, some of those mining projects are very complex and have faced some challenge to get permits. Many of those obstacles may be overcome easier by more institutional coordination and open dialogue among stakeholders. So the objective and the idea of the decree is to allow to give the legal ground to PPI to provide mining companies with support in environmental licensing of key projects that may or have the potential to increase the Brazilian reserves and production of strategic or critical raw materials. We wish to help to enable those projects to get off the ground on a sustainable basis. So what we do, we track environmental licensing projects. PPI will also join efforts and forces with the mining company and move together with it to overcome the obstacles and challenges that may show up during the environmental licensing. We also try to facilitate a dialogue and discussions among the mining company, environmental agencies, and other key governmental agencies such as FUNAI and INCRA, in order to enhance the quality and to overcome those challenges. At the end, we believe that this support and this joint work will enhance the quality and add value to the environmental licensing as well. It's also important to underline that it doesn't mean that those projects will skip any stage of the environmental licensing. There is no shortcuts. Companies shall complete all the phases of the licensing procedure and fulfill all the environmental requirements. However, this procedure is likely to be faster and safer with our support. So, what are the strategic minerals in Brazil? So we have three groups of strategic minerals or critical minerals. The first one are the minerals that Brazil is heavily dependent on imports. And these, I think the most important ones are the phosphate and potash, especially after the Russia-Ukraine military conflict, which is, of course, disrupted the supply of those minerals for our agriculture. We have as well a second group of high-tech minerals and minerals that are important for the green energy transition, such as rare earth elements, nickel, cobalt, copper, lithium, and other ones. We have as well a third critical mineral group, which is composed by minerals that Brazil is a top producer or an important global leader, such as iron ore and niobium. So you see that all those strategic minerals, they are very important for our economy or for the national security. So of course, that for a project be qualified in the policy, it's necessary that such project is focused on a strategic or critical mineral. We have a list of those minerals. We're talking here about 24 strategic minerals. And other two requirements. The first one is the project has to be strategic. I mean, has to need a strategic relevance, or I mean, a high potential to increase the Brazilian national reserves or production of such mineral, strategic mineral. The other requirement is a real environmental challenge to be tackled. This must be a real one or even a potential one, but I mean, we are talking here about projects that need to carry out a free, prior, informed consultation with indigenous peoples or tribal or traditional communities. We're talking here about mineral projects on cavity zones and so on. So, and of course, I mean, we have a very small team. So we need, of course, to select a limited number of projects because, of course, we have a limited resources as well. We cannot overcharge our team. So if a company is interested in taking part of this policy, the company must file an application by email. It's quite easy to do that. Of course, must justify, motivate its application, and the application will be analyzed and decided by a committee which is composed by the ministry, which is coordinated by the Ministry of Mines and Energy and composed by other governmental agencies, including us from PPI. So finally, we have here the 15 projects that have been qualified in the policy so far. So you can see that there are different kinds of projects and different size of projects as well. We're talking here projects of potash, of gold, of phosphate, of iron ore as well, manganese. So many of them. Most of them are in the state of Pará, but we have other projects in the other parts of the country as well. So I mean, it's a lot of work already, and I hope that I'll be able to respond to any kind of question you have regarding the policy of our new policy for strategic minerals. Thank you, Adriano.
Well, thank you, Federico. That was a very interesting presentation and summary of the policy that the PPI office is taking care of. And before we start to address our many questions to you and to the other panelists, I think it would be quite interesting to have the experience of two companies that have their projects listed as strategic projects under that policy. So I'm talking about Mineração Caraíba and its Boa Esperança copper project, and also about Centauros Metals and its Jaguar nickel project. So first of all, I should congratulate Antonio Neto and Bruno Scarpelli for their birthdays. It's an honor to have you here spending part of your birthday with us in this webinar. So I hope you can celebrate afterwards. But I would like to hear about the practical experience that Caraíba and Centauros have so far. So up to you, Antonio and Bruno.
Sure. Antonio, you want to start?
You can choose whatever
Oh,
you
go
want.
ahead.
No, I
Yeah.
can start. Okay. So
Yeah.
Adriano and Carolina and BCCC, thank you again for the opportunity of being here and sharing a little bit of our experience. Federico, hi again. Bruno, it's always an honor to be together with you, Jeff. We would have to be introduced in person in the future. So we have our project approved by PPI on November last year, and it was a kind of different from the PPI approach, I guess, because we already had at that time our installation license issued, but one of the conditions of our installation license was to present the release of the area by INCRA. So, and I think it's not uncommon or not a surprise that most of the projects, as Federico presented, are located in Pará, because there we have settlement areas, we have indigenous groups, we have traditional groups. So we have all type of difficulties to work in that state. It's a big challenge to overcome all of this. It's always important to be together with the communities and be transparent with the communities. In our case, we are dealing with a resettlement area that might be Bruno's case as well, because our projects are really close. And when you start dealing with this kind of situation, we are always talking about time. And I think PPI and the pro-strategic minerals are learning in the learning curve together with us. We promoted the resettlement of the families about 7 years ago. So we are talking about, again, about time. And time is of essence for every mining company. And I think it's a very good initiative to try to shorten this time to implement and to start a project in Brazil. So we saw this opportunity, we applied, and since the proposal of our project is to increase the national production of copper in about 5%, what would lead us here in Aero Brazil to the second place. It's the second biggest copper producer in Brazil. So I think we fulfilled all the requirements to be part of the program, and it was approved. And now we are trying to dealing with these difficulties, and particularly of Pará. It's a state that we are not used to work. Our former operations are in Bahia and Mato Grosso, so everything is new for us. And we hope that this intercommunication between the federal government and the agencies would make things be quicker and expedite the analysis and the approval of the requirements. These are our biggest hopes on the program. It's a very good initiative. We are fully supportive of this. And we hope that we can have more newer projects to apply again.
That's great to hear, Antonio. Thank you. Maybe Bruno can add something based on his company's experience.
Sure, Adriano. Thank you. Thank you for all the participants of this session. Thank you, Carolina. Look, our case is a bit different than Aero Copper's. So because we've just been accepted into the program, say about 2 months ago, I think, roughly. And from an environmental licensing perspective, we are a bit behind. So we've submitted our ARIMA, and it is under analysis at the State Environmental Agency. So we're still chasing our preliminary license, our LP. But that doesn't mean that that there's a shortage of challenges for us. On the contrary, I think there's a multitude of challenges for anyone who want to operate in Brazil, and especially in Pará, in that region of the country. But as the other panelists were saying in the previous section, that is, an entry barrier for mining. I think that is naturally, mining is a segment that is a long-term investment and is very capital intensive. So, we're always conscious of the challenges we will be facing. So Centaurus has been in Brazil since 2008. We know Brazil very well. The team that's been with us has operated in Brazil for many years. So, we are very conscious of the challenges. But this initiative of the PPI is definitely very important. We see it as an opportunity to interchange experiences between the companies, obviously with the confidentiality being kept. We see that the people that are in the committee, so Frederico and all of the other members who we've met a couple of times now, they have the experience needed to help companies navigate through the licensing process. And I have to confess, I was impressed with the multitude of skills. So you have geologists, and you have engineers, and you have people with other backgrounds that can surely help the mining companies tackle the problems that they're faced with. Now, one thing that I would, conclude my remarks with is, what I'd love to see is that these challenges that these mining companies are faced with and the learnings from this are somehow turned into procedures and protocols and maybe legislation and improvements in the legislation, so that, you know, not only projects that are considered strategic or priority minerals are supported, but all of the other projects. I think the more investment we have in mining in Brazil, the better it is for the country and for the mining industry.
Thank you, Bruno. And I'll come back with some specific questions to Antonio and you, as well as to Frederico. But before that, I would like to hear from Jeff on the Canadian experience and on some new changes that were just brought by the Canadian government with regard to critical minerals policy. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Adriano. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Terrific, great. Hi, everyone, and happy birthday, guys. The Mining Association of Canada, just to give you some overview, we're the national association, national voice of the Canadian mining industry. And our mandate is to advocate for our members to our federal government in Canada in areas where the federal government has jurisdiction. And that is an important note that I'll return to, as there's another level of jurisdiction in Canada that has jurisdiction for mining projects. Our provincial governments have significant oversight, and navigating this sometimes complex and sometimes duplicative regulation and oversight is an issue that is one that pervades all aspects of mining in Canada, in particular ensuring that our critical minerals policy and objectives are met. Our association has about 55 or so members that account for most of Canada's production of base and precious metals, diamonds, met coal, mined oil sands, and uranium. Many of our members have operations around the globe, as you know, and Canada continues to be a center for global mining finance with the TSX and the TSX Venture Exchange, the world's #1 mining and exploration listing venue. Canada, like Brazil and other nations, have experienced many of the factors that are driving movements in the commodity market. I don't need to go into too much about the recovery from COVID-19 and the various stages that we are all at, the dynamic that this creates in terms of demand and price increases. On a more positive note, the green minerals and metals boom. We've all heard the projections that about the increased demand, that in the long term, 3 billion tons of minerals and metals are forecast to be needed to generate the clean technology to meet the Paris targets. And we're all positioning ourselves, governments and industry, to play a role, I think, in these policies and with investments. Our government has set out ambitious goals in this area, net zero emissions by 2050, laws and ambitious GHG targets to meet that. Of course, increasing geopolitical tensions are part of the mix, many related to China, and in terms of them being the largest consumer of raw materials, and also one that possesses the majority of the world's refining capacity for rare earths and battery grade materials, certainly has implications for commodity markets. And of course, the situation in Ukraine is also happening. April 7th was our federal budget day in Canada, and there was an extensive focus in the budget on seizing the critical minerals opportunities for Canada. And what I think is key to kind of outline, though, is that this was not this did not happen in one day or overnight. There was really an extensive lead up of policies that formed the foundation for what the announcements were on April 7th that really will kind of put it into implementation, or at least the next stage of Canada seizing these critical minerals opportunities. And our government, federal government, really has long since their election in 2015 taken on some flagship national policy objectives in terms of climate change, reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples, and clean technology manufacturing. And while there's certainly merit in each of those individually, and they have a variety of different aspects, there's a significant interrelation between them, where mining is really central to achieving each of them and combined. Carbon net neutrality cannot be obtained without the development and continual improvement and deployment of clean technologies for which the materials are needed. And as I've mentioned, an exponential increase in the production of minerals and metals. And mineral production of all types, not just critical minerals, is a major driver of Indigenous reconciliation in Canada. And we refer to it wasn't a term we coined, but Indigenous economic reconciliation. Mining is central to that, particularly in Canada's northern and remote regions where economic alternatives really are more limited. And so the budget, I would say budget day in April really was where our government kind of put its money down on the mining sector as achieving these key policy objectives. And really, I think to help propel Canada as being a leading global supplier of critical minerals to the world. Now, of course, part of this opportunity, I think, would be in terms of the characteristics of these minerals. And I think where the opportunity is really seen to be is supply source proximity. They have to come from trusted partners and that are reliable. Supply sources with higher environment, social and governance ESG ratings are preferred. In particular, I think low GHG production intensity is a very key metric, as we know. We happen to be Canada globally quite a leading low carbon producer of many critical minerals and others. Being geographically proximate to the US and the EU helps. Existing trade agreements helps. And I just flag on the ESG front that one area where Canada and Brazil are already partnering is on improving environmental and social practices in the mining industry through our Towards Sustainable Mining initiative. It's a sustainability standard. In 2019, Brazil, through the Instituto Brasileiro de Mineração, IBRAM, became the 7th mining association to adopt TSM, and we share it freely with countries around the world. And it has a series of protocols focused on community and people, environmental stewardship, and climate change that each have a set of indicators that helps drive performance in this area. So we're collaborating on enhancing, our opportunities on this front. And sustainable sourcing, that movement globally continues to grow, green financing and whatnot. So they really are boosting. We'd like to think TSM is helping to boost our shared competitiveness. Quickly returning to what was announced on April 7th and what came before, which I think is critical to really understanding the kind of foundation for what was announced. I'll just outline a few key policy points along the way that led to our budget, and then just give you a highlight of a few of the kind of key policies that were introduced. March 2019, we had our federal government announce a Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan by our Natural Resources federal department. They had consulted on it for a couple years. It was developed with the collaboration of federal, provincial, and territorial government representatives. It was a statement of principles for the mining sector, and it had 6 strategic directions for which action plans are being developed to this day. The 6 directions were economic development competitiveness, advancing the participation of Indigenous peoples, environment, science, tech, and innovation, communities, and global leadership. And so that really laid out a bit of a flagship policy in terms of what was ahead. A key booster, I think, as well, was in June of 2019. There was a press conference at the White House, and President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau announced they were to collaborate on critical minerals. And this announcement obviously was big news. In June 2020, they ended up signing the Canada-US Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals Collaboration, and it guided engagement by industry, securing supply chains, and for strategic industries such as defense, information sharing, and a number of kind of forums for collaboration. But I really can't stress enough how a press conference at the White House with the 2 national leaders really propelled this issue to the forefront of our attention, and that was a huge boost. Another one that was key was in September 2020, our Minister of Industry outlined a platform that's called From Mines to Mobility, and it was geared at attracting investments that built up Canada's battery supply chain from all the way from mining and processing raw materials to assembling road ready electric vehicles. And that was another real boost in that it gave profile to the BEV opportunities for Canada, but it also really kind of united the auto and mining sectors in our country with a shared objective and an ability to work together to really pursue a lot of those policies. And we, in March of 2021, and I heard Federico's criterion for how Brazil established their critical minerals list, but we announced our list of 31 critical minerals. There was a criteria-based approach and a lot of consultation, again, between the federal government and with a collaboration, a task force of provinces and territories. The broad criteria was that the minerals had to be essential to Canada's economic security, required for Canada's transition to a low carbon economy, and a sustainable source of critical minerals for our partners. The last development that I think is worth noting was, perhaps a culmination of a lot of the building profile of the issue was we had an election last fall in 2021, and both of our leading parties who contend for government are the Liberal Party, who is in government currently, and the Conservative Party. Both had very detailed policy proposals in their election platforms related to critical minerals, and that just really demonstrated how the issue had elevated to a point where to get, in the old previous elections, we might count the number of mentions mining would get on one hand. Here we had sections of the platform devoted to mining. So we were feeling good that had the election gone either way, we had a party that understood the importance and the opportunity at hand. Fast forward quickly to April 7th of this year. What we really saw was what has been characterized as really the most significant budget for the mining industry in most of our living memories. And it really did, for us folks, center around Canada's first critical minerals strategy. And it was backed up with $3.8 billion in support over a period of about 8 years. And it was a few of the key measures that it will implement. On exploration and discovery, about $80 million to provide public access to integrated data sets to inform critical mineral exploration and development. The introduction of a 30% critical mineral exploration tax credit that would apply to certain exploration expenditures targeted at critical minerals on that list. In processing and refining, $1 billion over 6 years in targeted support towards critical mineral projects with a priority given to manufacturing, processing, and recycling. Research and development, about $145 million to support research and development in technologies and materials to support critical mineral value chains. On mining abroad and investment attractiveness, $70 million over 8 years to advance Canada's global leadership on critical minerals. It also flagged was the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act that is part of the kind of global transparency effort as well. So a significant amount of money to highlight the need to continue on that front. About $1.5 billion for infrastructure and supply chains to support those supply chains in Canada, with a focus again on the priority deposits. Indigenous engagement, about $104 million for a national benefits sharing framework that would support the sharing of government revenues that flow from mining projects to Indigenous communities. One of our provinces already has this in place. And money to expand Indigenous partnership programs already in place. And I think that the final bucket of expenditures is worth highlighting, as I think this really is where where the key change is needed. And we know that we can all announce big numbers and big plans, but how they actually come to fruition and are implemented is most critical. On the regulatory front, project approval, that is about $10 million to help provide assistance to developers of critical minerals navigate our regulatory processes and existing support measures. So just to map out kind of already what's there. $40 million to help our Crown Indigenous Relations Department support northern regulatory processes. There are some different regimes north of 60 in our country and the territories. I should highlight that the North is a critical area in Canada where we need to get policy and regulation right in order to seize the critical mineral opportunities, in particular in regard to climate change. Off-grid mines are reliant overwhelmingly on liquid fuels for power generation, and until there's a paradigm shift on energy where technologies such as SMRs can come online, they will be extremely vulnerable to these vulnerable assets. And so there's and also acknowledging that the Indigenous engagement and employment piece in the North is also central. But one stat that I'll flag for you in terms of critical minerals, and we repeat this in terms of making sure we get these regulations right for our North, is that nickel and cobalt commonly make up 60 to 80% of the material input into current EV batteries. And in 2018, about 52% of nickel, 62% of cobalt were mined at diesel-reliant mines in northern Quebec, Ontario, and Labrador. So it really is critical that we get those policies right. Just to conclude, our government put a little bit of a placeholder around project review, which is now known as impact assessment in Canada. And they've put a little placeholder for the fall economic statement where they hope to deliver additional support around how they can support the assessment of major projects, such as critical minerals mines. So I would say that that is the key piece here. Now we can do good work on ESG, we can continue our good work on Indigenous partnerships and engagement, but these processes take time. We have to get it right, not light, as has been said. And I think what will be key to getting all these other pieces is how we can ensure that our processes for project review are efficient and effective. And perhaps that is the one question mark that is coming out of the budget where we'll go to work. But if we can get that right and even move the ball, I think, forward a little bit, we have a better chance of success on these other areas. So we're very optimistic about what was announced in April. We're not delusional to think that this light switch can be flicked and these things will happen, but we've gotten the support in place, and we now just have to get the kind of enabling pieces right with a real focus on project approvals. So it's an exciting time. We've shifted to the kind of new phase of this implementation, and hope that we can report back with good news in due course. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's great to hear, Jeff, and I'm glad that you are here in this panel with us to report all those changes in policy, or actually changes in the budget, to provide for all those initiatives. And I hear when you say that Canada has, since last year, has a list of 31 critical minerals, which is just a bit over our list, which provides for 24 critical minerals. And then there are different approaches. I understand that all those initiatives in Canada, they are available for companies that deal with critical minerals in general, but then each company would need to apply for a specific initiative or allowance or budget or whatever. And in the Brazilian program, as Antonio and Bruno already reported to us, companies that have a project that deals with one of those 24 critical minerals, at least one, will have to submit an application to be included in the strategic minerals policy. So we have here two cases of applications that have been accepted, successfully submitted and accepted. But I would like to hear, Frederico, about basically the sort of a review or exam that is made by the government, and why some of the other applications, which I'm sure exist, have not been accepted. So obviously on a no names basis, but what is generally considered when the government assesses the applications, and why some of them have not been accepted?
Okay, thank you for the question, Adriano. Well, I don't have here the numbers, the figures, but I can say that most of the applications, they are approved by the committee. So when we talk about denied application, we're talking just about a few of them. But of course, some of them were denied, and basically some, not most of them, because of the mining company, the entrepreneur wasn't able to prove the strategic relevance of its mineral project. So, I mean, we're talking here about mineral projects that would not or didn't have the potential to increase substantially the national reserves or national production of that specific strategic or critical mineral. And sometimes also projects that are still at exploration stage. So we're talking here about projects that they're still drilling, they don't have any proof or wasn't able to prove the existence of mineral resource so far. So we need at least a partial exploration report analyzed and approved by the Brazilian Mining Agency to approve the application in the to be included in the strategic mineral policy. Other reason, and I think that one is the most common one, are the rejections because there is not an actual, a real environmental challenge to be dealt with. So we understand that that a project can only be included if it is facing or it's about to face an environmental challenge. We want to, approve the project and day after start to working on it. So this is, this is a very important requirement, and the committee is very strict when analyzing the project from this perspective.
Thank you, Frederico. And it's good to know the sort of assessment that the government makes in order to decide on an application. As you said, there have been already 15 projects included in the program. So obviously some other may have not been, but that shows the level of commitment of the government with regard to those strategic projects. And bearing that in mind, I would invite Antonio and Bruno to comment a little bit on the sort of dialogue that exists among the various or dialogue that is required among the various entities. Brazil is a federation, even though the mining laws are federal, environmental laws are federal and state laws. So, and sometimes a company has to deal with a federal agency, sometimes like in the case of the land authority that Antonio mentioned, that Aero Brazil has to deal with. Sometimes a company has to deal with a state agency, which is the case of Jaguar, as Bruno said, that they are dealing with the environmental authority. And there are other agencies that are either state or federal agencies. And sometimes there are practical difficulties in having all of them to speak among themselves. So I think that the main point here is to hear from Antonio and from Bruno how this policy can work in terms of streamlining the dialogue, and at the end of the day, the sort of licensing that will be made out of it.
Yeah, in our case, we have to deal with federal agencies, as you said. It's the state agency that is responsible for the environmental licensing, and we have also to have a close relationship between with the municipality, right? Because all the work that we have to do would be in the municipality, and we need to have access to the roads, and sometimes we have the state agency authorizing you to do some kind of improvement or work in a road or whatsoever in the municipal level, and you also have to go to the municipal level and pursue an authorization for this. And it's always hard for the entrepreneur to make those contacts between because in the first place there is always like a rejection or a distancing that you have to break with time. And we have also a lot of other challenges, shortage of people, shortage of money sometimes for the agency to pay visits or make other things and all this stuff. So it's important to have the federal government engaged, because they can open these doors, they can try to I don't know how to say this, but to conciliate the interests from the states with state, federal, state, and municipal levels with what the private companies needs to do, because the national interest of the projects of the mining, these 15 mining projects, should be more important than other things. So it's important to have them passing this message and helping us make these contacts and put things to move forward.
Thanks, Antonio. Bruno?
Yeah, well, first I'd like to comment on what Jeff said. I think we all agree that Canada is known worldwide for its mining activity, how it treats and how it addresses mining as being a core, one of the most important, business industries, one of the most important industries in the country. And I think that's something that we all here today would like to see Brazil doing as well. We strive to change the face of the mining industry in Brazil. The most recent events with tailings dam, obviously they haven't helped. But I think that just shows the amount of work that is ahead of us in showing that we are, an industry that has safety as the foremost priority, and that can do its job in a sustainable manner. I think that's one of the things we could learn from both Canada and Australia. So going back to what we were talking before, different jurisdiction, different agencies, I think that is the same worldwide. And I think one thing we all agree, and I've participated in the panel just before this one, the bottleneck for any mining project is indeed the environmental agencies being under-resourced. And when Jeff mentioned the budget that Canada put together, there was some money dedicated to helping resource these agencies. And that, I think, is something that Brazil should do in the shortest time possible. We need to help. There's a huge backlog of investment in Brazil. If we can expedite the licensing process, there will be so much money invested in both exploration, but most importantly, in development of projects. And that will obviously come back as taxes, and that creates a positive feedback to the system where we have more people being able to address these, handle and analyze these environmental applications. Now, with respect to the different agencies, I totally agree with Antonio. I think it all ties together. When you start a mining project in remote jurisdictions, you not only develop your project, but you bring along all of the infrastructure benefits that a mining project require. So you bring roads, you bring power, you bring, depending on the case, sanitation solutions. And all of this is done at the local level. So you have to be very well aligned with the local administration. And that, if you do that right, and you engage locals, then most of your social license will be done, most of the work there. And this is something that we have taken very seriously with our Jaguar project. So we have engaged over 90% of the people that work for us are locals, and now all of the people dedicated to Jaguar live in the region. So there's no fly in, fly out. That way they become really a part of the local community and can live and breathe the issues and the benefits that the project potentially brings to the community.
Thank you, Bruno. And it's good that you raised one point that Jeff commented on, and that is something that I would like to follow up on. In the previous panel, as you said, Scott mentioned, Scott from Equinox mentioned that it's becoming more difficult to do mining anywhere in the world. So and Jeff just referred to a number of initiatives that are part of the budget, the Canadian budget, and that have to do with critical minerals. Now, he mentioned some specific allowances or at least funds dedicated to streamlining regulatory processes and to assisting in navigating through project review, impact assessment. That is very much like as what you said, Bruno and Antonio, that the difficulties of navigating through all those agencies. So what I would like to explore a little bit here with Jeff is, do you see some similarities or perhaps better speaking, synergies between the Brazilian policy, which is much smaller than the Canadian initiatives with regard to critical minerals?
Yeah, and I think that the process in terms of the, it's a panel or a forum that would assess a project and then it would kind of enter the stream is a very interesting concept. And I think maybe it puts into practice some of the elements in terms of accessing and understanding and navigating the regulatory system that some of our announcements are seeking to do at the higher level. And, they're probably, we know that every project is different, and we know that the early work and all that companies do can be so critical in social license and partnership, and that there may be some best practices that we can identify as part of how do you elevate certain projects that are deemed a priority because of their strategic nature and critical minerals, while still doing other projects. But what are the tools that table or that forum is able to do that still achieve all the requirements of an environmental assessment and which is a legal process? Because it really is, a lot of politicians like to come in and say, we're going to build the railway, we're going to expedite these projects, but any sort of cutting of corners around what is deemed and what is required by the law can set a project back years. And so it's how to get those pieces, I think, ensuring that the process is legal and meets legal requirements and is a proper assessment, while you're still being able to add the inputs and supports for companies and for groups, communities, indigenous groups and indigenous communities and peoples, in our case, is a critical one. How do you do those inputs while not interfering with the pillars of the assessment process itself? And so I'm curious to learn more about how that kind of stream or table is able to perhaps do that in delivering, in a sense, while still respecting, regulatory requirements. Because I think, governments, you have to do the process correctly by law, obviously, but it's how do you ensure that you have the capacity for the processes, for the agencies, and for the companies to access as well. I mean, I think there's almost an art here to it, but it would be interesting to see how that is done in Bruno's example and yours.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And actually, when the Brazilian policy for strategic minerals was released, the many voices were heard asking precisely the same question. So perhaps we can ask that question to Frederico, because the assistance of the government in the licensing process is not something new or unique to strategic minerals. I understand that the government has been employing a similar policy to other industries like the power transmission. So what has been the experience, the practical experience of the government in those other industries that we can borrow from?
Okay, I would try to give my perception about that. you are right. I mean, we started with this environmental support for projects that weren't actually mining projects. We're talking here about railways, highways, airports, and so on. In my case here, that I work as well with power generation projects, power transmission projects as well. The problems, I mean, I think the challenge that we face in those projects are quite similar. We have some regulatory burden related to permits, to getting permits and authorizations. We have, of course, as mentioned, I think what Bruno said, that a shortage of resources in those governmental agencies. And of course, and I think this is a problem not only in Brazil, but also in Canada and other countries as well, a lack of effective coordinations between the government at their different levels. I mean, federal government, provincial or state government, and local government. So I think that PPI has developed a very consistent knowledge and expertise in articulating different government stakeholders and monitoring and a monitoring module for those environmental licensing process that has been proven already successful for other infrastructure projects. I think that we have maybe two key assets here at PPI. First of all, we have a multidisciplinary team. We have even a specific department in PPI, which is composed of experts from different governmental agencies with extensive knowledge and experience in relating to internal procedures associated with various different environmental licensing process. And they have, of course, a very relevant network that facilitates the dialogue between the industry or the entrepreneur and the governmental agency. The second asset I think we have, which is very, very good and helps a lot, is that we have a very extensive experience in monitoring those licensing the environmental licensing process for such projects. So we can bring and adopt a successful approach in this case in the strategic mineral policy mineral projects now. So this is something which is very useful, because here we work with different kinds of projects. So I think we can bring those good experiences and use it in other projects. But I want to say actually that another thing that I think is important. I mean, even if the governmental agencies were fully equipped with a very extensive staff and with plenty of resources, there would still have problems in the dialogue. That's my perception, at least. We would still have problems in the dialogue between the industry or the entrepreneur or the mining company, in our case, and the governmental agencies, because sometimes they talk like different language. That's a reality. So we understand that the PPI experience initiative, I think it's quite good, even if we had like very good and effective governmental, environmental agencies and so on. And I think that's a good experience even to share with, for example, with Canada, not only to get a faster process, but to get at the end a more complete and more comprehensive environmental and social approach for those projects. So we know that developing a mining project is not simple. It's a very complex enterprise. So understanding better the impacts during and after the life cycle of a mine is very important to the sustainability of the mining sector.
Yeah, and it's good that you raise those points, because at the end of the day, that has to do with the perception of mining or public perception of mining, which is precisely the subject matter of the next panel. So I see that we have just 1 minute or so left. I just wanted to offer the floor to any of the panelists if they want to make any final remark before we move to the next panel. I'm not sure, Bruno, Antonio, Jeff, Federico, any final remarks?
I would only add in response quickly that retaining expertise in our various departments that deal with mining projects is a challenge. We find our federal officials often move around very quickly. Few will spend more than a few years in a single role in a department, and then there often we have people that are in some cases new to subject matter. Many are great and professional, but if we had a magic formula for retaining people in this position, perhaps for a career, I think we would prefer that. Maybe we need to pay them more. Maybe that's part of it, but it's I think probably a challenge for everyone. But thank you all for the opportunity today. It was fun.
Thank you, Jeff. Fred?
Now, just a final remark. I just want to say that we're still open to receive more projects in the policy. I mean, we have a very small team, but we are trying to expand our team a bit to face those challenges that we have now. But we know that we have many important mineral projects in Brazil, and of course that we from PPI, we want to help the mining companies to move forward with those projects. So that's my final message. Thank you, Adriano.
Thank you, Fred. Any comment, Bruno or Antonio?
I just would like to say thank you again for the opportunity. Let's move forward and make this program happen and be successful. We are in the next election year this year, so we hope that either party that wins the election, this politics, this strategic mineral politics continues, and we see some good results in the near future.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned that, because Jeff said that in the last elections, the issue of critical minerals was a very important point in the elections debate. So let's hope for the same thing here in Brazil. Thank you for being here on your birthday, Antonio. Bruno, any comment?
And I just want to thank all of our fellow panelists and BCC for the opportunity. I think seminars like this, they help all of us learn a little bit more and support the mining industry towards being more effective. So thank you again.
Thank you, Bruno, and congratulations again for being here on your birthday as well. Carolina, thank you, and back to you.
Thanks, Adriano. I feel like bad now that I mentioned that was both Antonio and Bruno's birthday, but I think it was just such a fun coincidence. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thanks, Adriano, for moderating a great discussion. And of course, thank you, Fred, Bruno, Antonio, Adriano, and Jeff for taking some time off your busy schedule to share your insights with us. Before I call the next panel, I would like to share just a very quick video that was created. I think it will set up a little bit the stage on what we're talking here next. A video that was created as a manifesto by one of our members, Handbag Mining Investment, a Brazilian mining fintech that was certified by the Brazilian Securities Commission and authorized to operate as a digital platform for crowdfunding and collaborative financing in mining projects. So,
how long will it take to notice that I am part of your life? Since the world is a world, I am the basis for everything that has been, is, or will be here on Earth. I can be in the air, crossing the sea, or in the structure of your house. I also accompany you in the country and in the city in all daily situations. From the moment you wake up to your home routine and your day-to-day work. From the best meals and family gatherings to that lonely moment. There is just you, me, and nobody else. I am in the palm of your hand, within reach of your eyes, and also inside your body. I am present in health, sports, education, medicine, technology, industries, and even in your leisure and entertainment time. You may not realize it, but I am also in architecture, fashion, music, gastronomy, and tourism without distinction of gender, age, economic class, or cultural level. It would not be possible to smile, sit, run, or fly without me. It would not be possible to create heat and light, from a simple light bulb to an entire city. Most of the time, no one thinks about my existence, the benefits I provide, or how essential I am to the modern life we lead. But today, I invite you to look around you, reflect on me, and try to see how I really am. Fundamental to everyone, everywhere, and at every moment. I'm the basis of everything, which provides progress, security, and development. Who am I? It's a pleasure to meet you. I am the mining industry.
So the mining sector represents about 4% of the Brazilian GDP and 5% of the Canadian GDP, and it's essential for our everyday life, as everybody here knows. We also know that mining is not going anywhere, but we do have some work to do in terms of changing the public perception of the sector and the image that people have about mining in order to attract a diverse and young workforce, attract investments, and continue thriving. So to answer these questions, I'd like to invite our next panelists here today. The panel will be moderated by Paulo Soares, Director of Communications, Corporate Communications at IBRAM. We also have here with us Marcelo Paiva from A10 Investimentos. We have Maria José Salum from Sigma Lithium Resources. We have Luis Henrique from Vale as well. Just a quick reminder, and I'm going to switch the language. This next panel will be in Portuguese. So for the English speakers in the audience, please switch your audio in the bottom right of your screen to hear the conversation in English. Como falei anteriormente, esse painel será em português, então eu vou pedir para que os nossos panelistas, que o pessoal mude, desculpa gente, quem estiver ouvindo em inglês, eu acho que eu preciso fazer o meu switch aqui também, né? Quem for quiser aprender em português pode tirar o off da tradução. Gostaria de convidar o Silvio da Appian, também esqueci de mencionar ele. Desculpa, Silvio, para se juntar aqui com a gente, junto com a Maria José. Paulo, obrigada. It's over to you.
Tá joia, boa tarde a todos, é um prazer estar aqui com vocês. Eu sou Paulo Henrique Soares, diretor de comunicação do IBRAM. Acho que congelou na sua tela aí a sua foto, Carol.
Eu saí, na verdade, eu desliguei aqui o vídeo, então você não deve estar me vendo.
Eu continuo te vendo aqui na tela principal, mas vamos seguindo, sem problema. É um prazer estar aqui para discutir de um assunto tão importante, que é a reputação, como nós somos percebidos, e nós temos aqui 4 participantes que eu acho que vão dar um overview muito interessante aqui da opinião de cada um sobre a questão da reputação, ou como nós podemos, ou qual o papel nosso do setor mineral, dos próprios empregados do setor mineral, para trabalhar a questão da reputação ou como nós somos percebidos. Então, eu vou fazer isso aqui vai ser uma conversa, eu vou convidar cada um deles para fazer uma breve explanação sobre a sua opinião, sobre o assunto, sobre o tema, e depois a gente segue aqui e fico à disposição também para, no final, receber as perguntas aí dos participantes. Podemos começar com você, Maria José?
Ok. Vamos lá.
De Maria José.
Obrigada pelo convite para estar aqui participando, né, com o Paulo, todos os outros convidados para essa nossa conversa. Basicamente, eu começaria dizendo que essa percepção notoriamente ela não é boa, né, da sociedade. E o que tem sido feito nos últimos anos é uma tentativa, e isso tem vamos dizer, dado algum resultado positivo. Em termos de quebrar, Paulo, eu diria que uma história do próprio comportamento do setor, né? É um setor que, normalmente, pela própria rigidez locacional dos minérios, acaba se localizando em regiões, às vezes, muito remotas, com inúmeras dificuldades de infraestrutura, mas que, quando chegam, trazem toda uma mudança na dinâmica social local, na dinâmica econômica local, né? Então, é muito comum nós vermos a mineração agindo, acontecia isso muito no passado, ainda bem que essa prática tem mudado, né, de uma forma muito autocrática, onde ela se instalava. Quebrar, vamos dizer, imagens, tabus em relação a qualquer atividade econômica não é uma tarefa fácil, não é uma tarefa cujos resultados, às vezes, vêm muito de imediato, né? Sem dúvida alguma, acho que a nossa sociedade mudou. Ela hoje, mesmo nos mais longínquos rincões deste país, você tem um nível de conhecimento, de politização das pessoas, né, que acaba, vamos dizer assim, demandando outras questões da mineração, né? O discurso econômico, ele não é mais suficiente para a atividade mineral. Acho que esse vídeo que a Carolina apresentou é fantástico, porque é muito bonito isso. É diferente de outros setores onde você, vamos dizer, absorve esse produto deles de uma forma muito direta. A nossa forma é indireta. Mas é fantástico isso. É o dia a dia e, no final, você se apresenta, sabe? Você não precisa começar dizendo que você é a mineração. Então, é essa inversão, né, que eu gostaria de chamar a atenção, Paulo, e que eu acho que dará certo, né? Desde que nós saibamos fazer bem, desde que nós saibamos, de fato, abraçarmos as comunidades onde nós estamos, tá? De uma forma, desde o início de uma operação mineira. Então, acho que a gente vai ter muita coisa para falar, mas só um recado inicial.
Recado ótimo, obrigado pelas suas contribuições. Silvio, ou Paulo, né, você poderia fazer os seus comentários iniciais, Silvio.
Boa tarde, Paulo. Obrigado. Boa tarde a todo mundo. Obrigado pela oportunidade de estar aqui para ter essa conversa com vocês, né? Esse tema realmente é um tema fascinante, né? Porque esse assunto não é um assunto que é a primeira vez que a gente fala sobre ele, né? E provavelmente não vai ser a última, né? Pelo contrário, é um tema que é atual há bastante tempo, que a gente fala, discute alternativas, discute formas, mas ele continua bastante presente nas conversas e na forma como um determinado grupo, um conjunto de grupos de stakeholders, né, de indivíduos, de pessoas ou de entidades enxergam a mineração, né? Eu acho que, eventualmente, o Paulo pode trazer um pouco mais de detalhes específicos, né, sobre o trabalho, o ótimo trabalho, inclusive, que o IBRAM faz sobre, né, o tracking de reputação do setor e tal. E, no final das contas, assim, existe, de fato, um conjunto grande de pessoas ou de entidades que enxergam a mineração sob uma perspectiva que não necessariamente representa a mineração, mas existe um conjunto talvez muito maior, né, de que dá os créditos que a mineração representa, mas existe uma desproporcionalidade, um desbalanço do quanto cada grupo acaba sendo vocal em relação às suas formas de enxergar o setor, né? Mas independente de haver essa desproporcionalidade, né, a percepção é realidade, né? O que a pessoa, da forma como ela enxerga, aquela é a realidade para ela, e sim, apesar da gente ter melhorado muito enquanto setor nos últimos anos, tem coisas que a gente precisa fazer, tem coisas que a gente precisa se ajustar e melhorar, né? E meu objetivo aqui, em nenhuma medida, é ser prescritivo, né? Porque eu acho que quando a gente é prescritivo, você já fecha a sua cabeça para aquilo que não é o óbvio, né? Para a forma de pensar diferente. Mas eu acho que tem alguns elementos que a gente pode e deve alavancar na direção de continuar construindo uma imagem cada vez melhor e mais abrangente do setor de mineração, que passa por alguns elementos, né? Um elemento de escuta, né? Um elemento de utilização dessa escuta no processo de tomada de decisão, e um elemento que eu costumo brincar que é a inversão do ônus da prova, né? Que significa basicamente trazer as condições de contorno para o processo de construção daquilo que vai ser a operação, e não o contrário, otimizar a operação e dar ao time de relações externas, em suas diversas formas, seja comunicação, seja relações com comunidades, com governamentais, institucionais, ou quaisquer outras, né, o dever de ir para fora da empresa e fazer com que as pessoas aceitem com naturalidade aquele formato que foi implementado. Eu acho que dá para gastar vários dias de conversa em cada um desses 3 pontos que eu trouxe, mas eu queria abrir, né, a conversa com essas colocações, e claramente a gente está à disposição para poder entrar mais em detalhe em cada um deles. Por enquanto, é isso. Obrigado, Paulo.
Obrigado, Silvio. Marcelo, boa tarde, por favor.
Oi, gente. Bom, é um prazer estar com todos vocês. Hoje, assim, a Maria José, assim, é a nossa estrela aqui na Sigma, e temos aqui já a melhor pessoa aqui para compartilhar a visão dela. Aqui, assim, rapidamente, só acrescentar que hoje, quer dizer, fazer um bom trabalho e comunicar o trabalho bem feito na parte assim ambiental, social, ela hoje, fora ser a coisa certa, ela traz benefícios financeiros muito grandes, né? Hoje você tem assim, uma gama muito grande de fundos dedicados às práticas ESG, e uma vez que você passa no crivo deles, o acesso a funding é muito grande. Então, aqui eu acho que há assim, uma grande oportunidade para todos, e o que é bom para o país, ele vai trazer, assim, tem externalidades positivas muito grandes em comunicar bem um trabalho que seja bem feito, e o que puder ser melhorado, comunicar bem a melhoria, né? Passa a bola aí.
Ok, muito obrigado, Marcelo. Vamos agora ao Luiz Henrique, por favor.
Boa tarde, colegas. Boa tarde, Paulo. Primeiramente, agradecer aqui o BCCC pelo convite. Eu acho que eu tenho uma linha de raciocínio muito próxima também da Maria José, como o Marcelo comentou, e acho que a primeira coisa é reconhecer que houve erros no passado. Acho que a forma da atuação da mineração em diversas localidades, ela não levava, vamos dizer, na sua grande maioria, uma visão de longo prazo de sustentabilidade dessas comunidades ou do seu entorno. Eu acho que é preciso a mineração, que sempre foi vista como uma indústria de grande porte e de robustez muito grande, né, assumir um papel também de humildade e mudar esse viés, trazendo para uma sincera escuta ativa das comunidades, para a gente realmente entender, né, com propriedade, o quanto aquele empreendimento pode trazer de benefício. Acho que não é segredo para ninguém, as grandes empresas tiveram no seu mote de desenvolvimento as parcerias com os governos locais muito focados exclusivamente em pagar impostos e gerar empregos. Eu acho que essa visão ela tem evoluído. Obviamente, há um novo marco no setor, que foi traçado em 25 de janeiro de 2019, e que isso impactou e impactará toda a forma da gente relacionar, né, no Brasil e qualquer outra região que a gente estiver atuando enquanto indústria de mineração. Eu acho que um dos aspectos mais claros e que eu compartilho muito de um grupo que tem pensado isso é realmente a responsabilidade da mineração de verdadeiramente transformar o seu entorno, transformar as comunidades do seu entorno realmente em regiões prósperas, como muitas vezes o negócio é visto. E eu acho que no painel anterior, o Bruno Scarpelli comentou muito bem que, via de regra, os empreendimentos eles não nascem dentro de grandes centros urbanos, mas para alcançar aquilo, muitas vezes a prioridade é simplesmente a linha de transmissão da mineração, a estrada da mineradora, o acesso à água da mineradora. E todo o entorno ele se beneficia de forma indireta e não de forma direta, não de uma forma planejada. E eu acho que o modelo de mineração tem evoluído. Eu acho que a indústria, mais recentemente, nos últimos 5 anos, voltou a investir pesado em tecnologia. Então, a gente tem conseguido atrair novamente talentos para dentro da indústria. E os senhores aqui e as senhoras que estão aqui na indústria há mais de 10 anos sabem que houve um hiato, onde a gente tinha dificuldade de trazer talvez os melhores talentos que estavam se formando, ou os melhores talentos que estavam no mercado de trabalho para trabalhar nessa indústria. E eu acho que isso começa a ter uma virada a partir do momento que a mineração como um todo, né, começa a trabalhar com práticas mais sustentáveis, começa a ter uma visão mais tecnológica e assumir o seu compromisso realmente de desenvolvimento do entorno de forma sincera e com planejamento de longo prazo.
Ok, muito bom, obrigado, Luiz Henrique, prazer reencontrá-lo aqui. Eu acho que a gente tocou em vários assuntos, eu vou devolvendo aí a bola para todos os nossos participantes de forma randômica e aleatória, para que a gente possa realmente ter um debate, né? O primeiro ponto que eu queria partir de uma fala do Silvio. O Silvio disse, né, o que é percepção, o que é realidade. Então, ponto número 1, eu costumo dizer que não existe realidade, existem percepções de uma realidade. Então, muitas vezes, a nossa interpretação ela é daquilo que nós vivemos ou daquilo que está próximo de nós, mas não necessariamente é como nós somos percebidos ou como a mineração é percebida. E muitas vezes nós aplicamos vários filtros ao falar disso. E eu podia desafiar vocês que eu acho que um dos grandes problemas da mineração está internamente, né? Talvez seja o setor que mais se pune, que mais faz comentários afirmando aquilo que ele não quer ser percebido e que muitas vezes ele não é. Então, todas as vezes que eu repito, ninguém me reconhece, ninguém sabe o que eu faço, eu estou atraindo para mim, né, e consolidando uma realidade que não é verdadeira. No caso de todos os nossos estudos aqui no Brasil, eu afirmo para vocês que a reputação do setor tem melhorado, a média das empresas tem melhorado, e eu posso daqui a pouco comprovar com vocês por A mais B com números que nós temos recuperado. Não é o ideal? Não, não é o ideal, mas é uma recuperação e são números, inclusive, melhores do que anteriores aos 2 rompimentos de barragem que nós tivemos aqui no Brasil. Mas como isso é possível? Sim, isso é possível. E aí eu coloco já uma pergunta, né, de como, né, a Maria José fala que somente o econômico já não nos sustenta, já não pode ser a única realidade, ou a única a única justificativa para a existência dos projetos minerais. E aí o Marcelo completa, né, que hoje, né, dentro de uma governança e dentro dos assuntos, o financiamento só vem, né, se o projeto realmente tiver bases sólidas disso. Eu gostaria de que vocês comentassem o que mudou nos últimos anos, né, por que não somente a questão econômica, ela é vital, ela é importante, mas ela não é a única que vai sustentar qualquer atividade econômica, inclusive a mineração. Quem gostaria de começar?
Posso começar, Paulo, se você me permitir, e os demais também. Essa sua provocação ela é excelente, né? E quando a gente fala, né, que se a questão econômica é ou não é o fator fundamental, tem várias formas de enxergar esse elemento e tem várias formas de argumentar em relação a isso, né? E um dos ângulos de argumentação em relação a isso, eu acho que ele vai exatamente na direção de dizer que a questão econômica, ela nunca deixou de ser preponderante, e ela é tão preponderante, mas tão preponderante, que se a gente não tomar cuidado com as bases do negócio, e as bases do negócio são exatamente aquilo que o mantém vivo, e no caso da mineração, a relação com o mundo externo é o deal breaker, né? É o que vai fazer ou deixar de fazer o negócio acontecer, porque fazer perfuração, desmonte, carregamento, britar, flotar, separar, levar para o porto e transportar, isso é um processo praticamente dominado há muitas décadas, né? A dificuldade não está exatamente nisso, a dificuldade está exatamente em fazer isso de uma forma que faça sentido para além do mundo que a gente vive, né? E é exatamente por causa disso, né? De ter que fazer sentido para mais gente do que para a gente, e da gente enquanto empresas de mineração, né? É que a questão econômica ela continua relevante, e para garantir que a questão econômica se mantenha de pé, a gente precisa de lidar com o mundo externo de uma forma que a gente consiga se sustentar. Então, tem vários ângulos de argumentação, né? E talvez um dos ângulos seja exatamente esse, né? Para que a questão econômica se mantenha de pé, é absolutamente fundamental que os pilares, né, que hoje a gente chama de ESG e tal, mas, enfim, me dá até um certo desconforto a gente falar tanto disso hoje, porque esse elemento, isso é uma coisa que já deveria estar enraizado no sangue, na cabeça, no pensamento, na atitude, desde sempre, né? Não desde agora, ou desde 5 anos, ou desde 10 ou 20 anos atrás, mas enfim, enfim, esses são os comentários que eu queria fazer inicialmente, Paulo.
Obrigado. Pode, por favor, Maria José.
Bom, o Silvio tem razão, né, quando ele coloca a importância da questão econômica, né? Obviamente, sem se sustentar economicamente, você não tem a mineração, né? Mas, quando eu coloquei assim que o discurso econômico somente ele não se sustenta mais, porque se nós pensarmos só, eu vou dar um exemplo para nós que estamos aí lidando na área da mineração. A gente sempre fala na rigidez locacional, ela é real. Ela é real em relação à jazida. Ali está o seu bem mineral, daqui eu não saio, daqui eu não posso sair. Mas nem tudo tem essa rigidez locacional dentro de um projeto mineiro. Então, quando você começa a pontuar as questões sociais e ambientais, né, você ganha uma dimensão muito diferenciada. Nunca o econômico vai deixar de existir, mas, por exemplo, algumas situações, e a gente viu isso acontecer dentro da Sigma, e aí eu tive o prazer de participar de um projeto que nasce de forma sustentável. Então, por exemplo, uma das coisas que nós fizemos, e não foi fácil, diga-se de passagem, é conseguir colocar aquilo que não tem rigidez locacional, tá certo? Em áreas menos sensíveis socialmente e ambientalmente falando. Ora, se eu for pensar apenas sob o ponto de vista econômico, a minha pilha vou chamar de pilha, porque é o processo que a gente tem de disposição de rejeito na sigma. A minha pilha teria que ficar o mais proximamente possível da minha cava, da minha operação de lavra, né? E os meus rejeitos o mais proximamente da questão da usina de concentração. Obviamente, essa é uma equação que tem uma componente econômica importante, que é a questão custo de transporte, de estéreo, de rejeito, tá? Mas quando você consegue, é uma equação complexa, mas quando você consegue equilibrar isso, tá? Por exemplo, eu não vou colocar a minha pilha onde eu tenho que fazer uma supressão de vegetação de Mata Atlântica. O que eu estou ganhando com isso? O meu ganho econômico, e é isso que eu acho que a mineração tem que passar a absorver bem, e eu acho que nós temos evoluído muito nessa direção, é que nesse balanço econômico eu tenho que compor a economicidade do meu processo com o meu tempo de licenciamento ambiental, com as compensações ambientais, né, que eu vou ter que imprimir ao meu projeto, porque eu, às vezes, não, vamos dizer, não fiz as escolhas mais adequadas sob o ponto de vista socioambiental. Um processo de licenciamento que, ao invés de 4 anos, vai durar 6 anos, né? Um processo de licenciamento ambiental, porque eu suprimi Mata Atlântica, eu vou ter que comprar áreas para poder fazer essas compensações, esses custos têm que estar embutidos, né? Então, mais uma vez, entra o econômico? Sim, entra o econômico, mas considerando que eu estou fazendo o melhor dentro desse projeto. Tá? Então, eu trouxe esse exemplo.
Ótimo, Maria José, e é o melhor não somente para a atividade mineral. Quando você começa a mudar a forma que somos percebidos, é quando você demonstra que as suas escolhas são feitas pensando no melhor para além da mineração.
Exatamente.
Que em alguns casos pode ter um custo maior, outros casos pode ser simplesmente uma decisão tomada, né? Como você colocou ali, olha, eu poderia suprimir a mata, eu estou dentro da legislação, eu posso fazer, mas eu optei por outros fatores.
Não suprimir.
Não suprimir. É isso que precisa ser feito.
Exatamente.
E aí, nós estamos indo além. É essa mudança que o setor precisa entender que é relevante ser feito. E não ser minerocêntrico, né? Eu olho todas as minhas decisões a partir do que é para mim. Eu já sou maior agente econômico, eu tenho mais informações, eu estou sempre mais. É a hora da gente fazer aquele valor compartilhado. Pois não, Luiz Henrique?
Eu gostaria só de complementar que a Maria José comentou, né, que eu acho que assim, um dos grandes desafios que a gente tem na indústria, né, e aí vou falar especificamente aqui em Minas Gerais, parte dessa indústria é uma indústria centenária. Então, nós temos aqui alguns agentes, vamos dizer, nos territórios que estão há décadas naquela região. E eu não tenho dúvida que, obviamente, começar certo, como a Maria José e o Marcelo Paiva comentaram, que a Sigma teve a oportunidade de fazer um planejamento estruturado para realmente fazer uma visão de longo prazo e começar, né, numa visão sustentável, não é impossível retroagir e voltar a fazer certo daqui em diante, aonde a gente já existe. Há um falso dilema, né, na indústria que diz, mas eu já estou aqui, eu não tenho como... Existem formas de atuar. A gente precisa pensar de forma diferente. Realmente, assim como a Maria José comentou, a gente começar a sair do óbvio. é a gente envolver, e aí acho que essa é uma grande importância da gente também trazer gente nova para dentro do negócio. A gente trazer jovens, trazer pessoas que realmente são instigantes, que vão nos desafiar, essa nova geração que chegou, que não cansa de fazer perguntas inconvenientes para nós gestores, e por vezes a gente chega à conclusão de que, sim, eu não sabia que dava para fazer, ou eu nunca parei para pensar nisso. Eu acho que esse é um ponto interessante, que eu poderia dizer para você que está fácil de fazer porque você começou agora, mas não é verdade. Eu acho que todo setor tem condições de parar, repensar a sua forma de atuar e daqui para frente atuar de forma diferente.
Correto. Marcelo, você gostaria de comentar alguma coisa nesse tópico? Podemos passar para o próximo.
Aqui é só o acrescentar o que eu acho que, de uma forma geral, pode ter espaço para ser mais bem feito, a comunicação dessas melhorias. Né? Porque, assim, aqui, eu lido muito com os investidores que investem no setor e que estão buscando que as taxas de ESG, essa muita coisa, as caixinhas. Esse nome pode investir, esse nome não pode investir. Essa rigidez. Ok, então, quando é que você faz assim, essa mudança do nome que está na caixinha que não pode ser para transitar, e esse investidor ficar sabendo a prática que está sendo feita? Então,
É ótimo, e aí você já traz para mim aqui um gancho para a gente entrar no próximo ponto, e eu gostaria de trazer um dado, né? Nem todos vocês são da área, mas transitam aí, conhecem, e o que a gente fala sobre como nós somos percebidos, né? Existem 4 fatores que influenciam o como qualquer empresa, entidade, setor, marca, país, político é percebido. São 4. Né? Todos os estudos da área de reputação nos dizem o seguinte: 4 são os elementos. Né? O primeiro, o que é feito, aquilo que se faz. O segundo, aquilo que se fala. O terceiro, o que outros falam de mim. E o quarto, qual é o meu contexto. Né? Por exemplo, nós estamos aqui no contexto da indústria da mineração. Se eu fosse uma empresa de energia, o meu contexto seria energia. E, obviamente, tudo aquilo que carrega de histórico, contextos, oportunidades, dilemas que existem dentro desse contexto e, obviamente, da comunicação. Então, esses são. Eu queria, né, se você pudesse comentar, né, como você acha que é o nosso jeito de agir, nosso jeito de comunicar, alguma coisa que já foi falado, olha, a gente é muito para dentro, né, muito fechado, né, e o que outros falam da gente também. Eu gostaria de que você comentasse um pouco sobre isso.
Claro, Paulo. Enfim, a minha visão é a seguinte, né? Minha visão e experiência, né? Pelos diversos lugares que eu passei e tendo tido a oportunidade de discutir vários assuntos, alguns mais complexos, outros menos, vários muito sensíveis e assim por diante, é que existe ainda uma dificuldade em lidar de forma natural com os temas que são mais sensíveis. E aí, né, eu estou falando de dentro da empresa, sensíveis na percepção de quem está fora da empresa ou sensíveis à percepção interna de nós, de dentro da empresa, em relação ao que a gente acha que vão falar de mim, né, se eu falar sobre esse assunto, dependendo da forma como eu agir sobre esse assunto. Não raro, né, a gente tem conversas com a participação do departamento jurídico, e o jurídico fala, mas se você fizer isso, você vai estar fazendo uma assunção de culpa, então você não pode falar sobre esse assunto. Quando, na verdade, o tema não passa por culpa ou falta de culpa, é simplesmente um processo de comunicação transparente da forma como ele deveria acontecer. Né? Então, eu acho que a gente ainda, enquanto setor, a gente tem diversos bons exemplos, fantásticos exemplos, mas eu acho que a gente, enquanto setor, a gente ainda tem desconforto em falar das coisas que nos causam, que nos são sensíveis, e acho que a gente ainda em alguma medida, a gente ainda fala com uma certa altivez, né? E essa altivez pode advir de diversos elementos, né? Um elemento é o fato da gente ser uma indústria absolutamente não dispensável, né? Não existe o mundo sem a mineração, e todos nós sabemos disso, né? E às vezes essa altivez pode vir também de outro elemento, né? Pelo fato de ser o grupo econômico mais relevante no município, ou na região, ou no estado, e ela pode vir talvez até de uma terceira, ou várias outras, mas eu vou parar numa terceira, de um terceiro elemento que é do indivíduo, né? Das pessoas que estão nos cargos de tomada de decisão de dentro da empresa, né? Que estão acostumadas a lidar com as coisas a partir de uma postura de certa altivez. Então, esses são os elementos que eu enxergo, né? A gente se comunica ainda com alguma dificuldade sobre temas que nos causam desconforto, e a gente ainda se comunica com uma postura de altivez. Mas o último comentário que eu queria fazer sobre isso é que é absolutamente fundamental fazer a distinção de que o que a indústria comunica não é exatamente, ou o sucesso daquilo que a indústria comunica definitivamente não está ligado com a capacidade dos profissionais de comunicação dessas empresas. Existe uma confusão grande em relação a isso, né? Mas vocês não se comunicam bem, ou se comunicam muito bem ou mal, e atribuem o resultado daquilo à capacidade do profissional ou dos profissionais que estão ligados nessa função. E definitivamente não é o caso, porque muitas vezes se fala aquilo que é permitido dizer a partir de um conjunto de filtros que precedem aqueles profissionais, né? E isso pode causar bastante disrupção no processo e pode fazer com que ele seja subótimo.
Isso não foi uma fala combinada, né?
Definitivamente não.
Tá certo. Maria José, algum comentário sobre o assunto?
Eu estava com o meu mudo. Olha, Paulo, eu falo assim que as diferenças entre a narrativa e o discurso, né? São coisas bem diferentes. E a mineração, ela tem uma particularidade que vai demandar de nós uma transparência muito grande em relação ao que nós fazemos, por uma razão. Eu não estou entre quatro paredes, como, por exemplo, uma indústria química, que pode ter resíduos muito mais perigosos do que os resíduos da mineração. Eu trabalho a longo prazo. Eu ocupo um território a longo prazo, né? Não é como uma obra feia de engenharia civil que põe até umas telas, né, para tampar aquele movimento, mas daqui a 2, 3 anos eu tenho um belo prédio com arquitetura linda, um paisagismo maravilhoso. Nós não temos isso, né? Existe a questão da mineração, do impacto visual dela, e por um longo período, por mais que nós queiramos trabalhar com recuperações simultâneas de áreas mineradas, etc., não é esse o caso. Nós não estamos entre quatro paredes. Então, a transparência em relação ao que nós fazemos para as comunidades do entorno é muito importante. Não é realmente só geração de emprego ou de tributos, né? Mas eu me lembro muito bem que eu fiz um trabalho para uma empresa de mineração que sentia uma dificuldade muito grande dos seus próprios empregados na comunidade onde eles se inseriam, tipo, apontar o dedo, olha, aquele fulano ali é da mineração, né? Está causando isso, aquilo outro, coisas até não verdadeiras, né? E era, por exemplo, eles entenderem é incrível isso, mas é o próprio trabalhador da mineração entender para onde o produto dele vai. onde ele é usado, aquilo que ele ajuda a produzir no dia a dia, etc. Então, assim, essa transparência, nem sempre, nós estamos resgatando isso agora, mas nem sempre ela existiu na mineração. Hoje, nós temos uma legislação que nos ajudou, por exemplo, a que qualquer pessoa acessa um site da ANM que diz, naquele município, quanto da mineração foi como recurso de royalty. E aí, a cobrança passa a não ser apenas da mineradora, mas o que o governo local fez? Mas essa transparência, desculpem, isso não existia. É muito recente isso tudo. Então, eu acho que é a questão do discurso, da narrativa, nós temos que trabalhar essa comunicação a partir desse entendimento. Nós não somos invisíveis. Não temos como ser.
E não podemos, né? Não podemos. Se não queremos, se a gente quer ter algum tipo de relacionamento e melhorar a nossa reputação, a única coisa que nós não podemos fazer é sumir, ou só aparecer quando for do meu interesse. Aí, antes de passar para o Luiz e para o Marcelo, eu queria, você falou a palavra transparência, e me lembrou um dado da nossa pesquisa recente, que nós perguntamos para a sociedade brasileira qual seria a expectativa da sociedade com o setor mineral, para que a gente possa ter uma melhoria na nossa reputação, que eu disse que ela é mediana e ela não é ruim. E eu vou provar para vocês ainda. Inclusive, depois a gente pode fazer uma aposta se a nossa reputação é melhor ou não que do agro, que é uma outra discussão que eu quero apostar aqui com os 4 vocês, qual seria a resposta, vocês podem registrar aí no chat e depois eu vou dar o nome correto. Bom, mas aqui, a gente falando, a sociedade brasileira, mais uma vez, nos apontou 4 itens, né? O primeiro item é a reparação, né? A sociedade, ela exige que haja uma reparação daquilo que há, no caso, a sociedade brasileira, e, obviamente, quanto mais próximo ao ocorrido, Minas Gerais, quanto mais próximo aos municípios, a exigência maior, mas o caso é a sociedade brasileira quer que a mineração mostre aqui, como é que você reparou, o que você fez, como você indenizou. Esse é o primeiro ponto. O segundo ponto, ela quer segurança, né? Ela quer uma garantia que haja segurança. E ela cita, inclusive, a questão de barragens, né? Ou seja, ela quer que nós, do setor, que é uma coisa mínima, básica e necessária, que a gente garanta que haja segurança nas nossas operações. Então, eu estou dizendo de reparação, estou dizendo de segurança. O terceiro item, e não estão na ordem, é a transparência, né? Eu acho que os rompimentos pegaram todo mundo de surpresa por não conhecer a existência, inclusive, de barragens, né, na atividade de mineração. Elas sempre estiveram lá, mas aí sim nós não fomos transparentes o suficientes para tratar este risco existente junto às comunidades. E o último, que para mim é o muito interessante, é que eles querem que a gente demonstre um futuro da mineração e a mineração do futuro. Ou seja, que eu consiga demonstrar para eles que eu posso estar passando por isso agora, mas há algo lá na frente que eu estou construindo. Então, esses são esses 4 itens que foram colocados. E aí eu vou compartilhar um chart aqui. A Carolina falou que não precisava, mas eu acho que é importante e relevante. Vocês estão vendo aqui aonde eu tenho o resultado das nossas pesquisas de reputação nos últimos anos. Tá? Essa pesquisa é realizada com a sociedade brasileira, então existe aqui uma diferença grande do que isso aqui é o que a sociedade brasileira pensa. Isso aqui não é grupo de stakeholder, isso aqui não é político, isso aqui não é investidor, que a percepção deles é diferente, e em alguns grupos mais críticos do que a própria sociedade brasileira. Eu tenho histórico desde janeiro de 2007 com a média das empresas, e eu estou, então, aqui variando entre 70, comecei aqui em 2007, caí aqui sem uma explicação, tive uma queda quase de 10 pontos aqui quando eu chego em janeiro de 2013, vou ter uma queda significativa em função do rompimento da barragem, né, em Mariana, depois aqui em Brumadinho, mas você veja que nós chegamos, né, eu estou na linha pontilhada, a média de 47, nós perdemos muito, saímos de 70 e chegamos aqui a 47,7 pontos, o que, dentro dessa medição, ela ainda é uma reputação considerada fraca, né? Depois eu tive uma melhora e chego em 2022, janeiro de 2022, com 68,1. Vejam que a média das empresas mineradoras, ela é superior, inclusive eu volto aqui eu estou aqui próximo de 2010, com 69,9. Então, estamos no caminho certo da recuperação. Esses círculos aqui são quando eu comecei a fazer a medição sobre o setor. São duas perguntas diferentes. Uma coisa é a média, a outra coisa é como o setor é percebido. Eu tinha uma reputação de 55, eu caio aqui pós o rompimento, chego a 42, vou a 50, 62, e eu tenho uma melhoria de um ano para o outro de 3,7. Então, tanto a média das empresas quanto o setor mineral está com uma reputação de 66, mediano. Porém, esse mesmo instituto que pesquisa no mundo inteiro diz que empresas B2B não chegam ao nível excelente. Eles não têm nenhum resultado de pesquisa B2B, empresa B2B, ou setor que chegue chegue a mais de 60 pontos. Então, nosso foco é chegar nos 70, chegar o mais próximo possível dos 80, e o trabalho tem que ser feito, e com certeza o que mais conta neste caso é a ausência de problema, porque eu estou falando da sociedade brasileira, eu não estou falando de grupos de stakeholders que convivem e vivem com a gente todos os dias, né? E aí passo para você agora, Marcelo, Luiz, se quiserem fazer algum comentário sobre o assunto.
Aqui, uma coisa que ajudou bastante a gente, né? Porque assim, tem as faixas que fazemos, e temos as faixas e como ser reconhecido por isso, né? O que nós sempre estimulamos são assim, aquelas partes, especialmente aquelas que têm melhor reputação, mais locais, que tem um canal de comunicação assim, global. Nós sempre os convidamos a ir lá ver as práticas. Então, essa aqui, assim, de repente, fica aqui uma sugestão, exatamente estimular a vinda dos críticos. E mostra os fatos, e eles vão tirar suas próprias conclusões.
Esse ponto é muito importante, eu já passo para você, Luiz, porque a nossa tendência, e a ética como caminho, é não nos aproximar daqueles que nos criticam. Na realidade, pregar para convertidos é muito fácil, né? Falar entre a gente é fácil. Nós temos que circular e temos que nos relacionar com os demais, nós temos com os outros e não entre a gente, né? Luiz, você gostaria de fazer algum comentário?
Gostaria sim, Paulo. Acho que os pontos que você trouxe, eles conversam diretamente com o meu histórico dos últimos 3 anos. Para quem não sabe, né, eu trabalhei os últimos 3 anos justamente no relacionamento com stakeholders relacionados ao rompimento da barragem de Brumadinho. Então, nesse período, obviamente, o aprendizado que nós tivemos com esses erros do passado, tanto de comunicação como da forma de relacionar, foram gigantescos para a empresa, e temos tentado compartilhar com o setor para que eu acho que o setor todo aprenda com essa triste experiência. Mas eu acho que o fato de, por vezes, sermos criticados por excesso de informação ou a forma de comunicação que a gente dava, de toda a reparação e todas as compensações que eram feitas, elas, no primeiro momento, nos deram a certeza de que a gente estava chegando com a informação nas pessoas. Então, se tinham tantas críticas, as informações estavam chegando. Mas, em segundo momento, que a gente precisava mudar o viés dessa comunicação. A gente trazia, como o Silvio bem mencionou, né, uma visão ainda muito hierarquizada, uma visão muito altiva da mineração, como o poderoso dizendo o que é que fez naquela comunidade. E o que a gente, e filtrando talvez muitas vezes as críticas nas nossas próprias comunicações. Então, acho que a gente tem aprendido, obviamente não estamos no momento correto, estamos crescendo sobre tudo isso, mas a transparência que o Paulo mencionou, para mim, tem sido o principal aprendizado. Né? Uma transparência com empatia, é trazer realmente uma visão empática, entender melhor o que é necessário ser entendido e ser recebido pelas comunidades, e não só pelas comunidades, porque isso afeta o setor como um todo, afeta toda a comunicação. Então, quando você comunica numa comunidade de alta influência, aquilo vai chegar, né, em grandes círculos de stakeholders. Mas o fato que o Paulo mencionou nos incomodou muito, ainda é um aprendizado nosso. Não só não sabíamos como havia barragens, como aonde sabíamos que as comunidades conheciam, elas não conheciam o que fazer num caso de evento de grande ou pequena magnitude. Né? Os nossos famosos livros vermelhos do PABM, como a própria Defesa Civil Municipal e Estadual nos ensinou, né? Ele tem que estar mais disponível. A gente tratava isso como as 7 chaves, como uma informação que a comunidade teria medo de receber e a gente podia estar alarmando. E isso era, de novo, uma inferência nossa. A partir do momento que a gente dá essa transparência, que a gente comunica, você pode até ser bombardeado no primeiro momento, mas no segundo momento você vai ser reconhecido ou, no mínimo, deixar de ser criticado porque aquela informação está disponível. Então, acho que esse é uma grande responsabilidade de todos nós aqui de comunicar os riscos envolvidos nas nossas atividades, sejam para os nossos próprios empregados, sejam para o entorno de onde a gente está atuando, com o máximo de transparência possível, sabendo que, por vezes, seremos criticados pelo tamanho do risco que a nossa atividade, que é uma atividade classe 3, né, de risco, impõe aos trabalhadores e, muitas vezes, para o entorno.
Ótimo, muito obrigado, Luiz. Eu vou fazer só a apresentação do chart que eu coloquei ali e depois eu passo para cada um de vocês para as considerações finais, porque o que é bom dura pouco, ou percebe-se que dura pouco, né? Nós já estamos chegando aí ao final do painel. Então, aqui, ó, só os dados numéricos aqui, né? Então,
você consegue botar em modo de visualização, Paulo? Desculpa.
Não foi, não? Não foi, não? Não está, não?
Eu estou vendo...
não está em formato apresentação.
Faltava meu óculos.
Engraçado, para mim está até bom.
Então, aqui a gente tem com 11%, né, reparação e apoios impactados, segurança operacional 29%, um modelo de mineração sustentável 28% e a transparência com 19%. Ou seja, somente 1,3% que dizem, olha, não me adianta você me falar nada ou fazer nada que eu sou convicto contrário à mineração. Então, a gente, às vezes, vê que tem muito mais, acha que tem muito mais do que é a nossa realidade. Né? Então, para a gente poder fechar o painel e terminar no horário, palavras finais, eu passo para você, Maria José.
É bem interessante os resultados, né, Paulo? Eu acho que tem muito a ver com a fala anterior do Luiz Henrique, é que nós começamos a ser transparentes. A transparência é ela que gera a segurança. É falar, eu trago riscos, é que vai gerar a segurança. É muito interessante como que, às vezes, esse olhar tão para dentro, né, não nos permite até, vamos dizer assim, de uma certa forma, otimizar essa transparência que nós temos que ter. Né? Eu me lembro bem de um caso, trabalhando para uma empresa na área de fechamento de mina, plano de fechamento de mina, o que nós vamos fazer, e etc. Eram 5 empresas de mineração, porque era um polo minero-siderúrgico, né? Aqui em Minas Gerais. E foi muito interessante que eu levei junto um representante. Eu falei, não, essa reunião tem que ter um representante da comunidade. Então, se falou, é isso, é isso, é isso. De repente, eu falei, e a fala dele? Vamos ver, o representante da comunidade. Ele falou assim, olha, tudo bem pensar nisso tudo, mas o que eu gostaria de saber mesmo é sobre o risco dessa barragem. Incrível! Aí foi muito interessante que o engenheiro da empresa a qual ele estava se dirigindo disse assim, mas como? Nós temos um sistema de monitoramento fantástico, etc. e tal. Eu falei, que tal você pegar esta comunidade e dar, inclusive, uma transparência no sentido de otimizar a percepção da sociedade. A sociedade não é uma sociedade técnica, então ela precisa de uma linguagem diferente, né, Luiz Henrique? Você está vivendo isso agora, uma linguagem diferente para essa transparência. Eu falei, pega o pessoal, uma excursão à barragem, mostra toda a instrumentalização dela e fala dos riscos dela. Por favor, não me digam que não tem risco, né? Então, eu acho que a crítica ela tem que ser ouvida, ela tem que ser trazida para a empresa e a empresa tem que trabalhar com isso, né? Mas é só para fechar os meus comentários, a gente tem falado muito nessa questão do entorno, né, das comunidades. Existem formas maravilhosas de se trabalhar com as comunidades do entorno, mas essas formas exigem o que muitas vezes no passado não se queria, uma independência econômica desse poderio da mineração. Se nós não sedimentarmos isso nessas comunidades, preparando essas comunidades, né, para o momento em que há exaustão das reservas, para o momento do fechamento de mina, né, e trabalhar com eles isso. Olha, em tal momento vocês serão tantos desempregados. O que nós vamos fazer? Isso faz parte da transparência, né? Trabalhar um plano de fechamento de mina com os stakeholders. Isso aí tudo vai, eu acho, contribuir para dar uma transparência que não é só numérica, é uma transparência vivencial das comunidades com o empreendimento mineral.
Excelente, muito bom, e isso é fundamental. É a única atividade que sabe quando vai começar e quando vai acabar.
Quando vai acabar.
Vamos lá, Silvio, suas considerações finais para terminar?
Bom, sim, Paulo, eu vou ser, de fato, muito breve, né? Falar de dois elementos. O primeiro, eu vou retomar aquilo que eu falei no início, né, daquela conversa sobre a inversão do ônus da prova, né? A gente precisa desenvolver as minas com base nas condições de contorno que estão no mundo externo e não o contrário. Não desenvolver a mina sob a ótica operacional e depois dar ao time de relações externas o dever de ir lá fora e fazer com que as pessoas achem aquilo natural. E o segundo elemento é o seguinte, a gente precisa reconhecer as nossas vulnerabilidades, né? Reconhecer vulnerabilidade é uma forma de multiplicação de força e não é uma demonstração de fraqueza. É isso que eu queria falar. Obrigado por todo mundo pela oportunidade.
Excelente, obrigado. Silvio, Marcelo.
Gente, assim, vou pegando o gancho da Maria José. Assim, temos que as coisas boas, mas alertar assim, os pontos de receio. Assim, o grande mercado ele não quer mais ouvir coisas como barragens. Em muitos lugares, assim, eles não são aceitos e é possível aí que em algum momento mercados não venham aceitar. Então, eu acho assim, não dá para fugir da questão, mas eu acho que é assim, ser curto e grosso, direto ao ponto, sabendo que o mundo em brechas, deixa eu ver, ele pode penalizar os problemas. Então, seja dela.
Ótimo, excelente. Luiz Henrique?
Eu acho que a minha mensagem final é de parcerias. Eu acho que é as empresas entenderem que por conta própria e por si só é perpetuar o modelo do passado, é ter uma visão arrogante e desenvolver parcerias com as comunidades, com instituições e com os governos. É a única forma da gente avançar mais. É ouvir mais, né, antes de comunicar. Acho que esse é o ponto principal para mim, para a gente amadurecer nesse relacionamento que a gente precisa tanto amadurecer enquanto indústria, acho que no Brasil como um todo.
Ok, muito obrigado. Acho que foi extremamente rico, até falando, né, Maria José, as comunidades onde nós estamos, elas são parte do nosso negócio, nós fazemos parte das comunidades, nós somos a comunidade, né? Como dito pelo Silvio, gostei dessa inversão, né? E também do reconhecimento dessas vulnerabilidades, né? Como dito pelo Marcelo, vamos straight to the point, e o Luiz aí fazendo esse fechamento. Então, gostaria de agradecer muito, foi um prazer estar aqui. Esse assunto é inesgotável, temos muito o que discutir, debater, e repito, tudo isso começa dentro de casa, né? Nós que precisamos mudar se queremos ser percebidos de forma diferente. Não adianta simplesmente falar assim, me perceba diferente, se eu não tenho atitudes de mudança interna. Essas atitudes, elas precisam existir para que a gente possa ser percebido de uma forma. Estamos no caminho certo, no caso do Brasil, os nossos dados apontam, se não tivermos nenhum problema de segurança, a nossa reputação vai continuar crescendo, nós vamos continuar mantendo esse relacionamento e, principalmente, criando relacionamento pressupõe escuta e não só fala, né? Então, passo agora para Carol para fazer o fechamento aí do dia.
Obrigada, Paulo. Obrigada, Maria José, Marcelo, Silvio, Luiz Henrique. Foi uma discussão realmente muito rica, muito interessante. Agradeço de verdade vocês terem participado desse painel hoje, que é um painel que a gente montou aí com muito amor, porque eu acho que é um tema que precisa ser falado, eu acho que é uma discussão muito importante aí do setor, de realmente como é que a gente consegue trabalhar junto para e mudar, é o que o Paulo falou, né? Mudar de dentro para fora, né? Como é que a gente começa a mudar para começar a mostrar com transparência, com comunicação, de que o setor está fazendo a coisa certa e está avançando no caminho certo. Então, de coração, obrigada de verdade. Por um pedido aí do pessoal da EPN, eu vou aproveitar esse momento para tirar uma foto dos panelistas, que está todo mundo, então eu vou pedir para todo mundo dar uma risadinha e abrir a câmera para a gente depois postar. E gostaria de aproveitar e agradecer, né, todos os panelistas de hoje. Foi o dia mais longo aí do nosso PDAC Online, mas eu queria agradecer a participação de todos, das empresas, dos panelistas, todos os speakers que tiveram com a gente aqui hoje. E eu vou aproveitar, já que eu já mudei aqui na minha cabeça a língua, né? Vou aproveitar para fazer o fechamento, então, em português também. So I'll finish in Portuguese, since everybody's connected to the link. Gostaria de agradecer, então, todos os nossos sponsors, né, que fizeram esse evento possível, os sponsors Platinum, Vale, Toronto Stock Exchange, TSX Venture Exchange, Sescom Barrier, Baker McKenzie, Sigma Lithium Resources, Forby Mining, nossos sponsors Gold, Aero Copper, Aero Brasil, Export Development Canada, Wheaton Precious Metals, Equinox Gold, Yamana Gold, and Apian Capital Brazil. And os nossos sponsors Silvers, BMA Law, Brookfield, Landing Mining, Jaguar Mining, Bemisa, Horizonte Minerals, Álvares Massal, Promon Engenharia, e King Ross. E agradecer os membros dos nossos comitês, das nossas comissões de diversidade e inclusão, ESG e mineração, por pela colaboração e por ter ajudado a gente a montar esse programa. Gostaria de lembrá-los a todos que no dia 10 de maio estaremos organizando a nossa próxima discussão online, focada em ESG, né? A gente falou bastante de ESG aqui hoje, Brasil-Canada ESG Leadership Session, com 2 temas muito importantes, que é a energia renovável na mineração, né? Então, o papel da energia renovável em gerenciamento de risco climático, e uma discussão sobre mineração e biodiversidade, então como analisar e endereçar riscos e impactos de biodiversidade. No dia 24 tem uma próxima sessão focada em tecnologia e inovação, com 7 smart minings, 7 startups de mineração apresentando suas soluções para a nossa audiência, em parceria com o Mining Hub. E no dia 31 de maio, a última sessão online, focada em oportunidades para mineração no Canadá, a primeira vez que a gente está fazendo um evento focado em oportunidades no Canadá, com a apresentação de algumas províncias canadenses falando aí de como que o Canadá se posiciona também como um líder global de mineração. E aí no dia 13 e 14 de junho, espero todos vocês aqui para o nosso PDAC presencial, depois de 2 anos, no dia 13 e 14, o Brasil-Canada Conference at PDAC, 16ª edição. E os ingressos serão vendidos logo mais. E aí, mais uma vez, agradecer a presença de todos que estiveram aqui com a gente. Paulo, obrigada por moderar essa discussão tão interessante. Luiz, Maria, Marcelo, Silvio, obrigada de novo pela participação de vocês. Fiquem bem, fiquem com Deus aí, safe and sound, né? Tipo, com tudo isso que está acontecendo. E eu vejo vocês em junho aqui em Toronto para o PDAC presencial. Obrigada a todos. Um bom dia, boa semana para vocês. Até mais.